All right, Jared Holz here with IronHistory.com. So today I'm doing another interview in my series of Men of Iron. So Men of Iron is just a series of interviews I've done with different people who've kind of just lived their life with weightlifting, and whether it's bodybuilding, powerlifting, training. And today I have Matt Bryzcki with us, who has done it all really. He spent his whole life, his whole career. He actually just retired, doing all these different things. He started out lifting young, but we'll talk about that. Then he went to the military. Then he got into it academically as well. He mostly does high intensity training, is my understanding, and he's written many books, which is how I know of him myself. And so he's written many books over the years, but he's also done things in a kind of academic way as well. And he's written over 500 articles. Like I have his list of articles. You can't even read through the titles. There's so many of them. So he's contributed kind of in the space of books, papers, expanding the field. And also he's also was a coach for decades. So he's trained thousands of different athletes in different sports. So he definitely has a story to tell. So I'm excited to get it. So that's kind of what we're going to do. We're going to find out Matt's story. So welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks again. Thanks for the invite and having me on.
Yeah, I mean, I was going through your resume. Like I said, I knew your name and I've read some of your books, and so that was definitely interesting to me. But I didn't know your whole story. I still don't know your whole story, so I'm looking forward to finding it out today. So, Matt, why don't we just start out with your background about just like when and where you were born, and then just how you got into weight training in the first place.
Well, I was born on May 2nd, 1957 at Abington Memorial Hospital. I think it was Abington Memorial Hospital or Abington Hospital in Abington, Pennsylvania. So it's a little bit outside of, I guess it would be a suburb of Philadelphia. And then my father was in the Marine Corps at the time. He ultimately settled in a town of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and that's where I grew up. Uh, so a kind of story how it fitness ties in is, and this is since you're into history and that's pretty much your website is and the videos that you have, but so I think a lot of your or all of your readers or listeners will be interested in some historical aspects. So just to put uh, from a historical perspective, uh, when I was growing up. So we had, from 39 to 45 was World War II. Almost immediately rolled into the Korean War from 50 to 53, and of course you had Vietnam there. And the Cold War was hot, and what had happened was there were researchers, Hans Krauss and Sonia Weber, did a study, and they had a battery of fitness tests called the Krauss-Weber test, and they compared the fitness of American youth to the fitness of European youths, and I think it was three countries. It was Switzerland, Italy, and Austria. And long story short is in comparison, the American youth was much less fit than their European counterparts. A year later, well, they did the study came out in 54. A year
I've heard of
later,
this. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, a year later they met. Uh, they were at a luncheon at the White House, and they ultimately, uh, President Eisenhower. I don't remember if they communicated directly with him or it was indirectly, but basically he got wind of this, and of course Eisenhower was a former five-star general, and in the army. Uh, and it was referred to in Sports Illustrated as the report that shook the president or shocked the president.
Mm.
And and the bottom line here is that why it was shocking, especially to a guy who was a military guy, is American youth grow up to be American military. Because again, we still had the draft back then. So what he did, among other things, he created the President's Council on Youth Fitness. There was a meeting of the in '56, just right before I was born, the year before I was born. But the AAHPER, and that's the American Association of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation. They met. One of the things that came out of the meeting was to try to solve the crisis among American youth's fitness. Is they came up with a battery of fitness tests, and ultimately the battery of tests became known as the a version of it became known as uh, the YPF, the Youth Physical Fitness Program. And where I'm going with this is it ended up, and many of your older readers, give or take my age, are going to remember this because many schools throughout the country incorporated the YPF test. They did fitness testing of kids throughout the school systems throughout the country. And it was described by there was a reporter that wrote about it years later, and he referred to it as bizarre and traumatizing. And the
That's
reason
what
it was trauma,
you,
say that again.
I was about to say what you're going at. Yeah, you hear these stories just in passing, not just even for fitness people. So you hear about everyone, oh, when I was a kid, I had to climb the rope, or I was the last in this, or I was
No,
the,
right, right, right. And it was
yeah,
done in full view of everybody,
yeah,
right? Including I mean, back then, physical education. So now we're talking when I was in high school, it was the early 70s, from like 71, 75. And it was done in front of everybody. And in those days, it was, the boys had their own gym classes, the girls had their own gym classes, but in some instances, at least in my school, there was a wall that separated uh, the two. It was a movable wall that separated boys and girls. But at any rate, testing day rolls around. I'm 14 years old, 1971. I'm like 5'9", 99 pounds, almost literally the so-called 98-pound weakling.
oh, yeah,
I do the fitness test, and it consisted of, and it's still true today. I mean, they're still doing the fitness testing. It's not, or the fitness program is still done today, not on the scale that it was back in when I was going through school, but it consisted of 2 minutes of sit-ups, uh, maximum push-ups, maximum pull-ups, a standing broad jump, and a 300-yard shuttle run. But I remember to this day, and this is like 50 some years ago, I remember my performance, and it was I did 16 sit-ups in 2 minutes,
okay,
bent knee sit-ups. I did 7 push-ups, and I could just hang on to a pull-up bar. I couldn't do any pull-ups.
yeah,
So again, this is 1971, 14 years old. And again, you're doing this in front of God and everybody.
yeah,
Like your
yeah,
fellow classmates are watching you, the girls are watching you.
yeah.
So that's where that reporter, it could be for kids, it could be traumatizing, as you might imagine. Yeah, you're up there, you're either performing really well or you're not, or somewhere in between. But I didn't do well, needless to say. And in those situations, I mean, life's going to knock you down. Those situations, you got pretty much two choices. You give up or you get up. And I don't know what prompted me, but for whatever reason, I decided I got up. And by that, I mean, I decided to start working out. And it was, and later on that year in 71, I got a York barbell. You'll appreciate that. I got a York barbell set for the holidays, and I started to
Do you
work
remember what
out.
it was
And
like
then
a standard set? I'm assuming like a standard 1 inch
yeah, it
bars,
was just basically, I got some, one of those benches where the rack was like,
too
a couple
close.
feet apart.
Yeah,
So you had to
inch,
you had to be careful when you loaded and unloaded the bar.
sure. Mhm.
It was just a bar, basic plates, and I think they were the 1 inch bore back then. Does
Yeah,
that
that's
sound
what.
right for the York
Yeah,
set?
I mean they sold both, but that would
I'm
be
pretty sure it had
highly
the
likely
1 inch.
what someone, a child, a
Yeah.
teenager would be getting. They did sell like a
It was
higher
probably a
end.
6 foot bar too.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
on a dinky bench, and but at any rate, by as my fitness started to improve, our school actually, as well as a number of schools back then, had they took it another step with the fitness program. We had a physical fitness team, and we competed against other schools. And I made the team by my junior year, and in my senior year,
Well, that's a big difference. Was
we
it the
were in
same
a
type
meet
of
in
was it the same type of test?
it was the
What
same
was
test, yeah, same test. And so my senior year, we're competing in I'm on the team. We're competing in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So this is 1975, like April-ish, April, May-ish. Competing in Hershey, PA against, I think we had like 30 some other schools in a regional fitness meet. We
wow.
finished second overall. The team that won, Emmaus High School, they still do the fitness
Really?
team stuff. And in fact, the next year in 76, they won the national uh,
Do you
championship.
remember
And so
what's your like I don't know, pull-ups or
I do. I
percentage was?
remember, broad jump is tricky to remember because it's like in quarter inches. And a
Okay.
shuttle run, again, that's tricky because it's in like tenths of a second.
So it's not
But
probably a
I do
standard that
remember
you know. Yeah.
sit-ups, I was up to 100, and
Okay.
that was the maximum. You got 100 points for that. Push-ups, the maximum was 60. I was able to do 60 push-ups, and pull-ups, I was up to 18. And these are like, military style. In fact, that's where the story is going. Is that they were like dead hang pull-ups, like not CrossFit stuff or kipping.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Straight up, straight down, dead hang, full extension. Chin over the bar.
So from 14 to then what was that your freshman year to your junior or sophomore year, did you say?
My senior
So
year
how did your
was 75.
how did your body change in that time?
Well, that's a uh, good point. Is I was just slightly taller. I was like 5'10", maybe 5'10 and a half at that point. So I grew a little bit in height, and I was up to like 135 pounds, which still it's pretty on the skinny side, but it's still up like almost 40 pounds from. And you're going to grow naturally anyway, from that age. But
Yeah, yeah.
I was obviously much more fit and stronger.
Yeah, I mean, from a history standpoint, yes, I've heard of the one in the 50s, but that's really a big component of how exercise really moved through the world in general. In the early 1800s, when started really fitness went global, as my friend Connor Heffernan wrote a book about, uh, is a lot of it was the military looking at like the different wars and seeing how unfit they were compared to other countries
Yep,
and
for
kind of
sure.
starting to push fitness. So there was other
There was
components, but
even
the
a
military.
suggestion. Yeah, there was even a suggestion that some early components of the early fitness testing were like really related to military stuff. For example, it was thought that one of the things that originally was the softball throw, and they thought that was similar to throwing a hand grenade. So they had, and eventually that the softball throw went away. But it was like to your point about the military ties, and in fact, the YPF program got got endorsed by the Marine Corps. And when we went to the meet in Hershey, Pennsylvania, uh, the local Marines and reservists would be the scorers. And the way it was done is that we had a team of six people, and you would go through. The first event was sit-ups. So your team would report, all six of you, and they had mats on the ground, and the six of you each of you would report to a Marine, and they would count the repetitions. And then once you get done with that, then all six of you shifted to the next event, which was push-ups, and then the next team went to sit-ups. So you went through that kind of circuit.
Yeah.
So you had this, and you were given these scorecards, and I hand my scorecard to a Marine, and he looks up my name and he goes, Matty Bryzcki. He goes, I know your uncle, I know your father, your uncle Edu, your uncle Stashu, your uncle Frank. He knows more of my
You have an
relatives
Uncle
than I
Frank,
do.
that's right.
Yeah, Uncle Frank. Right? He knows more of these people than I do. So it just fate would have it. This is I'm with the guy of all the Marines, and I could have lined up with. I lined up with him. Somebody who knew my family.
Yeah, yeah.
So at one point he asked me, he goes, what are you doing after you graduate? And again, the draft had ended in 73, and this is 75. So there's no more draft at this point. It's all voluntary.
Mhm.
And I said, and I was going through a time I was on the rebellious side. Um, Everybody else was going to college, my other classmates, and I just wanted to do something different. So I told them, and this is like one of the worst things, maybe the second worst thing you could ever tell a Marine. Like when he asks you, what do you do? And I said, I told him I was going to join the Army. And he goes, the only things worse you could really tell a Marine is you're going to join the Navy.
Yeah.
So the Marine Corps and the Navy kind of like, even though the Marine Corps is part of the Department of Navy, but, or you told a Marine that what are you doing after high school? I'm going to move to Moscow and join the Communist Party or something like that. That's like, right.
It's in
So
that order.
anyway, he says, we got to talk. And again, he was a recruiter,
Yeah.
and he was stationed in my hometown, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. Again, just, and Hershey's like a couple hours away so it's not like right around the corner from Wilkes-Barre, but again, just as fate would have it. So I went in, talked to him, and he made me the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse, and
How
I
old are you
joined
at
the
this
Marine Corps.
point?
I mean, I turned 18 in May of that year in
So you were a
75.
senior in high school at that point.
Senior in high school. We graduated in for like June the 6th or something like that, I guess. But shortly thereafter, I was in, talking to him, and I signed the paperwork pretty quickly.
Before you, during those few years during high school, did you get into any? So you say you got your work set. Did you get into like traditional bodybuilding workouts, like follow like strength and health magazines? Did you get into any of the magazines or
I
anything
would
at that
I would
time?
probably say they were more like bodybuilding workouts than anything else. I mean, you're doing stuff whatever, you're doing the bench press, the curls, that kind of stuff. You're doing basic. I'm doing basic things,
Did you have like friends or a coach, or was it just trying to figure out what the magazines taught, or how
Just
did you
trying
get?
to figure out. I may be wrong in this, and you would maybe know more than me, but I think the York set came with some type of program,
Yeah, I
some
mean,
like
yeah, they had
couple of sheets of
they
paper.
yeah, so they had like courses, and kind of
Yeah.
one of the sort of complaints or downfalls of York is their course from 1930, whenever they first wrote it, late 30s,
Mhm.
to, probably your 70s when you're there, it's the same course. They might
Yeah.
have updated
Yeah.
some of the pictures a little bit, but probably hadn't even
Yeah. Yeah.
updated pictures
Yeah.
in 20 years, even that, where,
Courtesy of Bob Hoffman. Hey.
yeah, exactly. So it was just, so yes, it came with courses, but it probably wasn't what most I mean, there was nothing wrong with the courses. They were good. There were a lot of full body courses. It was usually heavy, light, medium days, but just not what a lot of the other magazines were promoting. But that's not necessarily a
Yeah.
bad thing. A lot of other magazines got into high volume and steroid, type
Yeah.
training and
This,
just the comic book stuff.
I mean, I did a lot of the fitness, pull-ups, the push-ups, the sit-ups, because that was part of the fitness
So, yeah,
program that we were
yeah.
doing. Our school, we had a universal gym.
Hmm.
We survived a flood. I mean, I think it was in '73. Hurricane Agnes rolled through town, and I mean, the universal gym was in the basement of our school, and it was completely underwater, like flood water,
Oh,
for like
yeah.
a week or something like that before the waters receded. And then, I mean, the universal gyms, they were pretty much about as indestructible as you could get, and there weren't a lot of
Yeah.
things going on. It was like
For
some
those
pulleys,
who,
some cables, some weights,
yeah, yeah. For those who don't know
So
what a
we ended up in
universal
what?
I just want to tell people, our listeners, that they're not aware what a universal gym is. Probably anyone my age or older probably does because they were so, but it was a piece of machinery, like it looked like chrome usually, actually.
Yeah, it was
I
a
think it was
chrome
released by
tube.
Zinkins, Universal, and then basically it was a centerpiece and it had a bench with some type of bench attachment, and there was some type of leg attachment. So they call it Universal because it was machines, but they were all not really great machines. I mean, they kind of, had
Yeah,
one
and
leg.
the selling points of that particular piece. I mean, while we're history from a historical standpoint, is and the Universal Gym Company was from a guy named Harold Zinkin,
Yeah.
bodybuilder, and he came out with that in 1957, the first version of it, right, for sale anyway. And it came at a really interesting time in American history because uh, circuit training was also popular back then, and the Universal Gym. In just to add to what you said, I mean, you said it was like a large chrome cube,
Yeah.
basally,
It's a good way to
and there were
describe it. Yeah.
stations around it, and it was ideal for circuit training because it didn't have a big footprint. It was I think it took up like 250 square feet or something like that, and circuit training was really popular, and it fed off of the other because you could. It was ideal for circuit training, and the guy sold a boatload of these. They were like at some point they were like almost everywhere, like
Yeah.
high schools,
I mean,
colleges,
I've encountered a bunch in my
YMCA's.
time. I haven't seen them in a long time, but I had when I was in my residency, and I remember they had one in the basement. I think they had one at my college. Yeah, I mean, they were still around
They
in
were
the
all over.
90s or early
And I
2000s.
mean, when I got to Princeton in
Yeah.
'83, they had three of them in the main gym, and then there were two in the varsity area. So they had five, just at Princeton University. I saw them in the military all over the place. Um, and just one other thing I want to add about that is that, to give your listeners a little bit more insight into what we're talking about is basically like nowadays the so-called jungle gym or like the multi-station apparatus that you see in a lot of gyms.
Yeah.
That was the Universal Gym was the forerunner of all that. That's where it all kind of started.
And there weren't really machines then. I
When
mean, in your time, we'll talk about where early 70s in a second, but the machine, yes, there were cables and there were some benches and stuff, but to put it all together and have machines really didn't, yes, there was times history they had some things, but it really wasn't commonplace until really right around the same time, actually, was when Nautilus was coming out in the early 70s, 71. Had you heard about any of that at that time, do you remember? Or was it kind of too not on your
Model still, where I was, it's going to come into play in a little bit. At that point, no, it was just the Universal was the big deal, at least in, my
in high
area.
school and school? Yeah.
And again, so I'm doing, besides the free weight exercises, I'm doing the Universal had a bench press on there. It had a high-low pulley, so I'm doing lat pull downs.
Yeah.
It had dip handles. It had a leg press, an overhead press station, and you
Yeah.
could get other attachments too. But that's my workouts were going back then.
Okay.
Uh,
All right. And
uh,
you were did you train by yourself or was it at school or with like buddies or
I certainly, when I was training at home, it was by myself. I don't remember. I think every now and then we did buddy stuff back in high school, depending on who was around.
yeah.
You
And was
know,
your fitness like test that you were just talking about and competing, was that like your sport or did you do any type of sports
I
also?
did some other sports, but it wasn't anything to brag about. I mean, I played basketball in ninth grade. Uh, I did track in 10th grade. 10th grade, it was track. I did the 400, we were in yards back then, so it was on a cinder track, 400 yards and 800, or I'm sorry, 440 yards and 880 yards were my two events. And then, believe it or not, I golfed because my family, in fact, that's how the, the, the Marine that I met in Hershey, Pennsylvania, my recruiter, Mike Vaccaro, that's how he knew my family, from the golf course because
Ah,
my father and my uncles were really good in the area. So I played golf. Wasn't good at it. In fact, I was. I like to say I was the best guy on a really bad team, and not to knock everybody else, but and again, being the best guy on a really bad team, that's being like the tallest guy at a midget convention, kind of thing. And so it's pretty much I wasn't really gifted in terms of the team stuff like football and
gotcha.
so on. I mean I did the basketball, but wasn't good at baseball, football.
So
Didn't do that.
let's go back to when you joined the military. What did you sign up for exactly? Did you have to? So you say you're just turning 18. You're being rebellious. Was this a thing with your
Yeah,
parents? Was it
bit
like
of a rebel.
so? Did you do it without your parents' discussion or permission or anything like that?
I knew they were in on the decision. My father, who was a former Marine, he did not want me to join. My mother was, I'm not sure she had an opinion about it, probably not keen on it, but it was at that point I'm 18, I could do, they didn't have to sign off on anything.
So this
Um,
was like just after Vietnam, also, correct? It just ended.
yeah, Vietnam, I think they officially, Vietnam ended, I want to say like April of 74 when they
So really,
evacuated
right afterwards. So
Saigon,
did you?
you know.
So you were rebellious in kind of a different way, maybe than I don't know. You hear about all that time period and people being rebellious, and that a lot of anti-war sentiment going on at that time, right?
Oh yeah, that came
Yeah,
into play actually
yeah,
when
yeah,
it was still once I got out, and this is like fairly long time after the Vietnam War. I mean, it wasn't like nowadays where there's a lot more uh, veterans are a lot more welcomed with open arms. There was still that anti-war
yeah.
sentiment,
That's what I
uh,
hear.
even after I got out, in the late 70s and early 80s. You just didn't really talk about your time in the military as much because that's what you were kind of up against. It
Yeah,
was totally different climate than it is nowadays,
yeah.
you know.
But that didn't affect your decision to joining.
No, I know rebellion meaning I guess to elaborate on that is I just wanted to do my own thing, kind of like whatever, go against the grain, kind of. If
Yeah,
everybody was doing this, I want to do something else,
yeah.
kind
Okay,
of
so tell
thing.
us about what did you join? Where did you end up getting training? And what was that?
Well, so believe it or not, that was my first time in an airplane. Was going to in August, late August. I got was sent to Parris Island, South Carolina, and the Marine Corps has two for enlisted training. The two locations are Parris Island, South Carolina, and uh, San Diego, California. And basically, it depended upon where you resided for the most part. If you were from east of the Mississippi, you went to Parris Island. If you were from west of the Mississippi River, you went to San Diego for your training.
Okay.
So I go down there in August of for basic training, and this was the first time I was ever on an airplane, and it was only the second time I left the state of Pennsylvania. Again, I'm 18 years old, and I had been to New York to see the Mets play the Braves, the Atlanta Braves, back in, I want to say like 73 or 74. But that was my only time I had left
Uh,
Pennsylvania. 18 years old, different time.
yeah. I mean, that was
Um,
probably motivation too, right? I mean, a lot of people join the military to see the world, get
yeah,
out, see something else,
yeah.
you know?
In fact, when I got out of basic training in November, I was just telling someone a story the other day about it. Uh, uh, I from so South Parris Island, South Carolina. I took a bus back. From instead of flying back to Wilkesboro, I
S-
took a bus back,
See the
and I just
world.
wanted to see because I was never
Yeah.
out of the States. I just wanted to see what was going on.
Yeah.
It was like a 24-hour bus trip too, from there, but because you're stopping everywhere,
Yeah.
along the
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. All right. So what
But
was basic training like? Was that what you expected? Or was it, I mean,
basic
it's
training,
your stories.
I didn't know. You can't paint a accurate picture of what Marine Corps basic training is like unless you actually do it. I mean, there's been some movies that they they capture it fairly closely, as good as a movie can. And I guess now you see, with the rise of YouTube, and you see videos on there of what recruit training is like, but it's still not like actually going through it. It's pretty
Sure.
brutal. And back then too it was never a policy for a drill instructor to you couldn't hit a recruit. It was against SOP, standard operating procedures, but it was done.
Mm.
Uh, so we got hit all the time. We got punched, and but it was that's something that you're not going to see in put on the YouTube video. It's not. I imagine it's almost never done today.
Mhm.
Back then, it was kind of accepted,
Yeah.
and your choices were too. Is you didn't know. You didn't know what. I mean, you're going through basic training back then. You didn't know that you couldn't be done.
Yeah.
And even if you knew, your choices are, okay, do I tell somebody about this? And then if it's your word against the drill instructors, and the drill instructor's almost certainly going to win, especially if there's no other witnesses. So do you tell somebody about it, or do you just suck it up and just keep it to yourself?
Yeah, I mean, there
And
weren't, there's not the internet, there's books. Your only probably interaction with the military is probably
yep,
movies, really, which are probably,
yep.
which weren't even as realistic back, now. So I actually have a memory, guys, I don't even know when it was. It was like a 60 Minutes thing. It must have been 80s, early 90s or something. But it was, it was so unknown that it was like a hidden camera type thing. And then I don't remember if it was the Marine Corps, but it was one branch of the military where it was about their hazing or how they treated people. And one part I remember is when they were pinning them at the end, they would not put the pin on. They put the pin with the sharp part in and like hit it into their skin
Oh
kind of.
yeah, yeah. That's still done, and
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
they'll do it's not as much anymore, but they'll still do that, and or they do it on the shoulder.
Yeah.
Like
I don't know.
you
Somebody
have the
remember
little
that, but
you have the little chevron with the metal, basically metal spikes
yeah.
on the
Yeah.
end, like, and they put against your arm, and then they punch it in, and it's
Yes.
getting your
My point
stripes.
being that was like a 60 minutes like piece. Oh, we're uncovering that the military is rough on their recruits. But
Yep.
it's probably been going on from beginning of time,
Yeah, that's usually not something like that nowadays. It's more likely done in like I think it's more likely done in, it's not done in the regular fleet. It's probably done in like yeah, in the Marine Corps would be the reconnaissance guys are probably doing stuff like that.
So tell me how did it go for you when you were there?
I was really I was in good shape obviously when I went down there, which is an advantage. And I'd done, the Marine Corps fitness test is really close to, and it doesn't change. Marine Corps doesn't change too much. So the fitness test that we had to do then, and it was true for like quite a long time with very few variations. We had to do it was 2 minutes to sit up, so I was used to that. But the standards were actually lower in the Marine Corps than they were when I was in high school for the YPF program. It was
Really?
80 sit-ups in 2 minutes was maximum. So I didn't have to do as many. Uh, we did pull-ups and in pull-ups 20 was maximum. And when I was in high school, it was 30 was maximum. You need to do 30 to max out. So it was down to 20. And then the third part of the fitness test then was a 3 mile run. And I think a perfect score there was 18 minutes for 3 miles, so 6 minute mile,
It's good. Have you done,
basically.
can you do 30, were you able to do 30 pull-ups?
I didn't. I could max out the pull-ups and sit-ups no problem,
Wow.
but I never. The best I did 3 miles was 19:55, 19 minutes and 55 seconds.
Okay. It's all
Uh,
good.
so the physical part wasn't too bad, but I was worn down by the end after like I think we did 11 point some weeks of training, and that changes too over the years. But I was worn down. Uh, it's more so, and I think a lot of military will tell you this with basic training. It's a lot more mental than it is. I mean, physical obviously comes into play, but it's like mental. Like
Sure.
when, like, because you see guys, they just can't.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
That's a
sure,
wrap.
sure.
I'm
Yeah,
done.
for sure.
I'm not
I'm sure
doing. Get
people,
yelled
I'm
at,
sure
and
people got dropped out, right? I mean, that's
oh
always,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, the attrition rate's probably when I was in, my guess is somewhere around like 20%. So you start with eight, and platoons, depending on what time of the year, platoons would start with as many as 80 recruits. So out of 80, you're losing 16 on the average. Some during like the winter months, you're not getting. I mean, summer's kind of peak because you're getting a lot of high school graduates. So during the winter months, you're not getting a full platoon might be like 60 or 70. At least when I was in, might be like 60 or 70 you're getting. But the max typically was 80, but you might lose like
Okay.
20%, give or take
So,
a little bit.
and so what happened after training? Where'd you get shipped to?
So after I graduated, then you have a little bit of time off. Then you go to your MOS school. Your At least it was true back then. Now you go to
I don't
uh,
know what that is. What's
I
MOS
think
mean?
you go. Well, MOS is Military Occupational Specialty. It's called MOS. The military's great on acronyms,
Yeah.
like but that's one of them, MOS. But now they have it's infantry school, and I think it's ICT, individual combat training or infantry combat training, something like that. Uh, where after basic training, that's where you go. When I was in, you unless you were infantry, you if you were infantry, you went to infantry training school or combat training, and then if otherwise, you went to your school for your MOS school, military occupational specialty. I was a My recruiter got me guaranteed admin, uh, so that was my main job. My primary MOS was admin. Went back to Parris Island. That's where the admin school was. And then I think that was like a 3 week school, maybe a 4 week school. And then after that, I went to my first duty station, which was 29 Palms, California, which I have to admit too that I got 29 Palms, California mixed up with Palm Springs and totally different animal, but I ended up in 29 Palms, California, which I
Wow.
really, and then
What
the
part of
number one guy in
California
the
is that?
that's in the Mojave Desert. It's like Southern California.
Okay.
It's like 50 miles east of Palm Springs, if I remember right. But it's out in the middle of the desert.
Oh, okay.
And besides that, too, is the guy who finished first in our class, who was I was friendly with. Uh, he chose 29 Palms, so I figured, oh, he's the smartest guy in the class. I mean, must be okay. And again, I got it mixed up.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, but
Sounds nice.
So I'm out. I liked it out there. I liked
Okay.
it. At that point, it was, and it went through different names over time, and I think it actually reverted back to what it used to be. Is it's simply MCB, Marine Corps Base. But at one time, it was let's see, Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Training Center, or MCAGTAC. But Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Training Center, that's a mouthful. But I think it's back to just simply MCB, Marine Corps Base 20 Palms. Uh, I was out there. Uh, had a couple of good role models while I was there, which was good. And so
Role
at one
models
point in
for
life,
what? How to be a good officer, how to be good military, how to be
just in
good
terms of being a good Marine,
Marine. Yeah. Yeah.
trying to good at what I was doing in
Yeah. Yeah.
administration. And at one point, I'm like, the plan had always been, 4 years and I'm out, and then it's time to do something else. And at that point, I thought I was ready for college. And but after a while, I started like, I gotta. maximize my 4 years. I only want to do 4 years, but I want to get the most out of it as possible. And the admin thing, I mean, it was okay. It was, I learned stuff there, but it wasn't like it didn't feel like a, being a Marine kind of thing. I
Yeah.
want to do something more. I want to take it to a next step.
Yeah.
But again, I just wanted to, I wanted out in August of '79. That was, I was going to get out. So I had to do something kind of quick. And what I ultimately did is I applied to drill instructor school,
Mm.
and I asked to be sent to uh, San Diego because I was already on the West Coast. I figured if I asked for Parris Island, uh, that they might balk at that because it was like 3,000 miles, east. I figured I'd have a better chance. So I ended up actually had to get my age waived. Yeah, back then, I think now you have to be like 24, 25. Back then it was 21 was the minimum age. And I was 20 years old.
Wow.
And so I had to get an age waiver from CMC, the Commandant Marine Corps. And I got that I got my orders in November of '77, and I left 29 Palms in May of '78, San Diego. So I got my my application was approved.
Wow. So
So
you
I
are
went to drill
now
instructor.
a teacher already, become an instructor.
Yeah, and again, I'm trying to get the most out of my 4 years in there. There were other stuff I could have done, some other options, but I would have extend my service beyond the 4 years. Uh, so May of '78, reported to drill instructor school. Uh, as a side note, and I guess some of your, at least I'm sure you got some veterans
Oh yeah.
who are
Yeah.
listeners, and uh, at least some of those are probably Marines, so they'll appreciate this part of it. Other people might not follow the importance of this, but the chief drill instructor in the high school was Gunnery Sergeant Overstreet, who ultimately became the 12th Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps, which is pretty cool.
Mhm.
And that's the highest enlisted rank in the entire Marine Corps. So
Wow.
he was actually the CDI, Chief Drill Instructor, at the high school when I was there.
Okay. So you kind of
Uh,
under him, you saw him rise up too, kind of.
s- uh, so let's see. So May '78, graduated let's see, we started with 35 Marines at the school, and we dropped eight of them,
This is the
something
ones
like that.
that you were.
We graduated 27. I remember that. So we dropped like eight
This was the
Marines.
ones that you were instructing. You're talking about, or within your class?
No, this is when I went to that school, drill instructor. You're learning how to be a
Instructor
drill
school.
instructor.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so we started with 35 Marines. Uh, there's actually somebody in class that was younger than me. I mean, I turned 21 by the time I reported to drill instructor school, but there was somebody still 20 in our class. So he was actually, yeah, but we were like the youngest. Uh, Ultimately, when we graduated, we were the youngest drill instructors on the drill field at San
Okay.
Diego.
It must be
Uh,
interesting
but
trying to less you looked old. It must be interesting trying to get these basically other kids to respect you. Was that an
it
issue?
was it was first of all, I think 21 was too young to be. I mean, they over time they bumped up the age, the minimum age. I think you have again. I think it's 24, 25. Uh, and that's probably a lot better for. It's not probably. It's better.
Yeah.
You're more mature at that point. You got more time in the Marine Corps at that point. I didn't have a lot of time in the Marine Corps. I was a sergeant, so the fifth enlisted rank, and I just turned 21. But I still, I would have had a better experience if I was older when I
Yeah, for
went.
sure. It's just yeah.
But training it was 6 weeks, and it wasn't that bad. It was like some people. I think it's probably I've looked at the course syllabus for drill instructor school within the last few years. It seems to be more demanding than when I went in.
Mhm.
It wasn't terribly hard. Some people likened it to going through boot camp all over again. And yeah, no, I mean, we didn't really get yelled at. I think they're yelling at uh, future instructors now in school than when we went through. But you're getting inspections. You're getting, I mean, I mean, it was the demanding school, but it wasn't as tough as I thought it was going to be.
Okay.
Did a lot of running, a lot of uh, physical training, PT, and you're learning just different aspects of how to make a civilian into a Marine. You're doing a lot of drill, which is marching. You're learning all the
Yeah. So
ins and
how long
outs
were
of
you
that.
an and then once you became an instructor, how long were you an instructor for?
I had the deal was that I graduated in it was like 6 weeks of a school. So I graduated, I don't remember the exact date, but I think it was early August, not 6 week, it was 8 week school. The first two, the first 2 weeks were uh, what I'm thinking about 6 weeks is that the first 2 weeks were really, really easy. And it picked up at by week three. So it was an 8 week school. We're getting done like, I think we got done like early August. And the deal was that you had to have at least 1 year left on your uh, enlistment in order to attend the school and be a drill instructor. I had that almost like to the day.
Hmm.
So I didn't have to extend my enlistment
Oh, okay.
any. Um, so I graduate in August, and again I think we graduate 20 27 of us I think graduated. So I think we dropped like eight. We started with 35. So graduate 27. I got assigned to third recruit training battalion. I picked up at any given point at either of the recruit depots, San Diego or Parris Island, you're going through, there's different, recruits are in different stages of training. So some are just starting out at the same time, some are just graduating.
Gotcha.
Uh, so I ended up getting assigned to a platoon that had already started. And so I finished that one, and you're learning. I mean, you're taking a lot of notes because it's like anything else. I mean, what you learn in school I mean, it's just like a basic understanding
Sure.
of, it's like even you go to college for whatever, you're getting a basic overview of, you're getting an education, a basic overview of, what it would be like to be employed in that area. But it's a different animal once
No, for
you're
sure. For a
out there,
profession, I'm a
so
dentist.
you're learning, you're taking a lot of notes, you're doing a lot of listening, paying attention, trying to gradually get into the scheme of things.
Yeah, as I
And
was
then I
saying, like,
finished.
so with my profession as a dentist, and I always tell people who just got out of school, like, or I don't tell them that to their face, but really, when you get out of school, you really don't know anything. You really don't.
Yeah,
You have your
yeah,
doctorate in dentistry, and you know almost enough not to hurt someone. But I think it takes 5 years of practicing to even understand what you don't know for a lot of people. Like,
yeah,
you'll
yeah,
you'll never know it all. But it's like probably with any profession. You got this, piece of paper, but you really got a lot of learning life still
yeah.
to do. So same thing. So
So
you,
one quick story
yeah.
related to this is that it's maybe my favorite story ever in my 4 years of the Marine Corps.
Okay, let's hear it.
Uh, was so it's a Sunday and it's 1979. I think it's in the spring. And Sunday is kind of like and you work a lot of hours as a drill instructor too. I mean, you're easily doing over 100 hours, and I don't know how they do it nowadays, but it's probably similar. But when I was in, so if you had three drill instructors assigned to a platoon, one drill instructor was considered to be on duty. The, the other drill instructor was considered to be he was referred to as standby, and the third drill instructor was off. So theoretically, at least on paper, you get every third day off. But realistically, that almost never happens because there's almost always some type of training that requires all hands on deck. So it might be like the confidence course, or it might be pugil sticks, or you're at the rifle range, and it's like you're there like, and sometimes you only have to go in for a few hours, but you're still going in.
Yeah.
So I remember my first full platoon, I had like 2 days off, like literally 2 days off in like 12 weeks, give or take. And that's wears you down. It's
Yeah,
after a
yeah,
while,
yeah.
but so we're and Sundays is usually like a lighter duty. You're uh, you're getting ready for the week. I think we used to, if I remember right, you slept in another hour more than normal and so on. So the one particular Sunday, I was the duty drill instructor, and there was only one drill instructor. There was nothing going on the schedule, so everybody else was off. And you're going through when you go through Marine Corps basic training, you go through it's called a there's a series of 4 platoons, and you go through training together, and you compete against each other.
Okay.
So to see like who wins fitness, who is the highest fitness scores, who's the highest rifle range scores as platoons. And so you're so I'm with a platoon, and there's 3 other platoons in our series. And this Sunday, the word got passed down from the series gunnery sergeant. So he's the highest ranking enlisted for the series. So it's 2 ranks above me. He passes the word that he wants all privates to go to church, all recruits to go to church. So I was Catholic, and my goal was to take all the Catholics in our series to church. And again, each platoon, and I don't remember what we had at this point, but you have like 60 to 80 recruits.
Okay.
Most of the recruits, so the whole series has anywhere from 240 to 320 recruits.
Okay.
I was assigned to take the Catholics to church, which was or the church at San Diego was at the base theater. It doubled as the church. So in addition to my recruits, and I'm sending them out on a so picture I'm in a squad bay with all my recruits, my privates, and I said all Protestants get outside, get on the road. So my Protestants leave. All these people get on the road. I'm just calling out different
Sure.
religions. And so all Catholics get on the road. So I got one private left. And let me think about whether I should tell this part of the story or not, because it's not politically correct. Uh,
Well, you've already started.
Go ahead, I'll say it. So I have one private left, and in my head I went through all the religions that I knew.
Yeah.
So I went over to private, it was an Asian private, and I said, you couldn't do this today, but I said, what are you? Because in my head there's like nothing left. And he said, sir, the private's Buddhist, sir, and which is something I hadn't thought of.
Yeah.
And I said, well, today you're Catholic. Get outside. Because we had no
Yeah.
contingency for a Buddhist recruit,
Yeah.
again. But uh,
Different times.
so I get outside, and I got this mob. Usually I have like again 60 to 80 recruits, and now I've got close to 200 of them because most of them were for the whole series. One of the recruits was my one of the guide is usually the leader of each platoon. My guide happened to be a Catholic, and he was in this group of recruits. So I had him. I asked him to do a head count. You're always doing head counts in basic training, making sure you know where everybody's at. So he
Mhm.
comes up, he does the head count, he gives me the number, fine. So I go, I did right face forward march, and as I'm calling cadence, I realized really quickly that, but I mean, this is usually you're marching like, and you're like 4 columns. And if it's like, if you have 80, you have 20 in each column. So there's like, and you march from the back. So I'm in a back area, and there's only like 20 recruits in front of me,
Okay.
by 4 columns. So
Gotcha.
4 times 20 is
Yeah.
80
Yeah. Yeah.
or less. It's depending on how many you have. So now there's like almost 200. So it's a really long, these columns are real long. And by the time my voice carried to near the front, they were out of step.
Hmm.
So I adjusted myself to be more in the middle of the platoon, which is not where you're supposed to march from because you want everything in front of you. So, which is actually part of the story. So I'm marching from the middle. We get to the base theater. I get my guy to give me a head count, and he gives me a number which is 2 less than what we started with,
No.
right? So I'm scratching my head, but I said, "You must have miscounted. Give me another count." So he comes back, and again, it's 2 less. So I dismissed them, and I sent everybody into the base theater, and I spent the next hour trying to figure out what was going on here. And I'm thinking, the possibilities. Maybe he miscounted before we left.
Yeah.
Uh, or another possibility is I lost 2 recruits somewhere,
Yeah.
right? And meanwhile, keep in mind, I got other drill instructors recruits with me. not just mine, but three other platoons I'm responsible for.
Yeah.
So church is over, they form up. I got my guy to give me a head count. He gives me a head count, and now back to the number that we started at. The two are back, right?
Okay.
So I march them back to the barracks, and I dismissed the recruits, and everybody went to their different platoons. And I went and visited the other three drill instructors for the other three platoons, and I told them what happened. And I said, I don't know if anything happened. I mean, maybe it was just simply miscounting.
Yeah.
But I said, I think there's a chance that two privates went UA, unauthorized absence, at some point. So I said, what you do is up to you, but I know what I'm going to do. So I go back to my platoon, and at this point, I don't know what
Mhm.
happened, but I made like I did, and I said, uh, two privates were UA, unauthorized absence. I want those two privates up here right now. I don't even know if I have any cards at this point. I don't know if anything happened. I don't know if it was, and if something happened, I don't know if it was my two.
Yeah.
So I said, and if not, if I don't get those two people, recruits up here right now, I said, everybody's going to pay. So nobody's coming forward. So, okay. So, and then one of the policies for drill instructors, and again, this is like broken all the time, but you could only, when you're inside, you can only, we called it IT, incentive training. So it's basically you're tasking the recruits with you're punishing them by having to perform physical tasks. And the physical tasks are like you're doing bends and thrusts, which is burpees nowadays,
Mhm.
push-ups, sit-ups, side straddle hops, things along those lines. And you can only do it inside. You can only do 10 recruits at a time. Outside, you could do the whole platoon. But indoors, they limit it to 10. And it had to be, uh, we actually had a card that we kept in our cover, which is a hat, that said, and it was laminated, and it gave you the rules.
Wow.
They could do 2 minutes of IT. You had to give them a minute break, 2 minutes again, a minute break, 1 minute, so 5 minutes total of actually exercise, and then you couldn't touch them for another hour, right? So I do these 10. I ask again for the two people, nothing. So I
Wow.
get the next group of 10, next group of 10. So I go through the whole platoon, and I said, all right, we're going to do this again unless I get those two people up here. Two people step forward, two recruits step forward. I couldn't believe it. I got right, and they come up there and they told me what happened was that once I stopped the platoon outside the base theater, I went up to get the guide, and they were in the back, and they just peeled off the back end, and they were goofed off for an hour. Just roaming and then they were hiding in the bushes, and then when the platoon came out of the church, they went to the back of the platoon, and nobody's the wiser, right? So I'm just hammering these two recruits,
There you
just
go.
hammering
Lucky
them down.
there.
Push ups, sit ups, bend and thrust, push ups, sit ups, bend and thrust, right? So I dismiss them, and this is a Sunday, and Tuesday rolls around, might have been Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I had to be there like, I didn't have to sleep over. So somebody's always with the platoon, like somebody's always sleeping over, at least one drill instructor. I wasn't tasked because I slept over Sunday night. Uh, And so I didn't have to come in on that day until like breakfast. So I come in, and I was a junior drill instructor, which is sort of like an assistant coach. And I checked in with the senior drill instructor, who's like the head coach, if you want to put in a sporting perspective. So I said, no, he says to me, as soon as I walk in, he says to me, the series gunnery sergeant wants to see you. And I said, what's he want? And he goes, I don't know, but he's pissed. It's okay. So I go over see the series gunnery sergeant. So again, he's two ranks above me. So I said, "What's up, Gunny?" And he said, "The battalion sergeant major wants to see you." So this is the highest enlisted rank in the entire battalion. And I said, "Well, what's up?" And he goes, "I don't know, but he's pissed." Right?
Okay.
And like nobody knows what's going on, but everybody's pissed, and it's like pointing at me. Right? So as we're walking over, and this guy, by the way, the battalion Sergeant Major Yoder, he looks like if you took the Marine Corps mascot's a bulldog, but if you took a bulldog and like the head of a bulldog
Wow.
and made it human. This would like Sergeant Major Yoder looked like. He looked like a human bulldog. Right? He had
Rough.
been in the Marine Corps longer than I was alive. Right?
Yeah.
So we go over to battalion headquarters, and I march in his office, and he's sitting at his desk with his head down, and he's got papers all over his desk. So I report in. I said, "Sir, drill instructor Sergeant Bryzcki reporting is ordered, sir." And he's still looking at down at his desk, and he looks up at me and he goes, "Who the f do you think you are?" He obviously didn't say f. He said the word, but
Yeah.
and I had no idea what he was talking about.
Yeah.
And I just said, "Sir," and he repeats it again. He goes, "Who the f do you think you are?"
Uh,
I have no clue as to what's going on. I said, "Sir," and he said, "Who the f do you think you are that you can make privates do push-ups because they didn't want to go to church?" I go, ah. So I start to explain to him what would happen. He
yeah.
doesn't want to hear anything. He doesn't want to hear anything. And a serious gunner sergeant who passed the word that all privates go to church, he's standing right next to me and he's not saying anything on my defense. So I just stood there and took it. I mean, he's just
Yeah.
like killing me. He's just F this, F that. He's yelling at me, he's frothing at the mouth,
Jeez.
just like a total beatdown.
Yeah.
As it turns out, the backstory, what happened was that these two recruits, they wrote home to their parents. They told their parents that was their version. The
Yeah.
drill instructor, not that they were UA,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
weren't where they were supposed to. The drill instructor made them do push-ups because they didn't want to go to church. So the parents contacted their congressman.
Oh,
The
jeez.
congressman contacted Depot. So I'm 21 years old and I'm being investigated by Congress, basically, for all intents and purposes. But he just, he chose me a new butthole,
Yeah.
just left, right, up, down, and then finally dismisses me. And on the way back, I said to the Surgeon Gunner Sergeant, I said, Gunny, why did, you knew what happened. Why don't you stick up for me?
Yeah.
He goes, my hands were tied, which loosely translated means he didn't want any part of the Sergeant Major
Yeah.
either. So he just let me take it. But
That stinks.
that's like my favorite. I'm sorry it was so long, but
No, it's fine.
that's like my favorite Marine Corps story right there. So 21 years old, investigated
Getting
by
yelled
Congress.
at best by Congress. So,
So
so
I
how?
get out,
Yeah.
like later in August of that year, I get out in '79. And like 10 days later, I'm sitting in a classroom at Penn State. I mean, literally, I went to my first year was at a branch campus, which just closed, by the way. It was Penn State Wilkes-Barre.
Okay.
Penn State's got like, or at the time, they had like 8 or 10 branch campuses in different
Okay.
cities in
Yeah, I've
Pennsylvania.
heard that. Yeah.
And at least a couple of them, including Penn State Wilkes-Barre, closed. But I was living with a grandmother at the time, and I was commuting to Penn State Wilkes-Barre, the branch campus, like 10 days later. And, I got to admit my sheer ignorance on this. I didn't realize that, when you apply to schools, you get rejected. I didn't realize. I thought you went to whatever school you wanted to. So I
Okay.
applied to one school and one school only. It was Penn State.
All right.
And fortunately, I don't know what I would have done uh, if I didn't get accepted, but I had no backup plan.
Yeah.
It's one of the few I try to always have a backup plan. This one I thought was a gimme. I didn't have a plan. But I did get accepted and went to the branch campus for the first year.
Okay. And
Um,
what did you how did your what were you trying to get a degree in if you knew that yet? And how did you start
well,
getting involved in fitness and
the
during
good
college?
question is, so the fitness stuff never left my head, including, I go back to the that fitness test I went through in '71 where I did so miserably in. That's like even today, it's still in the back of my head, push for that. So I had a natural interest in fitness. Obviously, in the military, it was big on fitness there.
Mhm.
I knew I wanted to do something in fitness. And at the time, the only thing the closest thing they had at Penn State was health and physical education. So I got all my electives out of the way in at the branch campus, Penn State Wilkes-Barre, and then I transferred. They had really nothing left for me to take at that point because there was no courses in my major. So I ended up transferring to the main campus for so that would have been, so 79 to 80 was my freshman year at Penn State, and I was at the Penn State Wilkes-Barre, and I transferred in the the fall of '80. We were on trimesters back then, actually, like 10-week trimesters. Went to the main campus. But here's another thing that came into play too is so my freshman year at Penn State, and this is like the early part of 1980, like just past the holidays. And I'm watching TV, and there was an ad on TV for a new fitness center that was opening up in a town across the river, 44, Pennsylvania. And it was called 4F Club Nautilus.
Mhm.
So I'm watching the ad, and they're looking
4F? You said
say it again.
4F? You said 4F?
4F is actually an interesting part of the story. For the club, 4F meaning FFFF, and somebody's marketing idea was that in naming the club, it stood for physical fitness is first and foremost, even
Oh.
though physical starts with a P, not an F, but that's what they took some liberties with that. And also, somebody pointed out later on that 4F is actually a military designation for being unfit for service.
Well, there's also 4F is they're uh German gymnastics, which started in like the 1800s, and those Turners. Maybe you've ever seen Turner societies around. It was like they're basically a German gymnastics society became a social society, and there's some in the United States also. There's still a few around, like almost like lodges that guys hang out. But anyway, their slogan was 4F. I actually have a pin right here,
That's interesting.
but I don't
My
know what
understanding,
it
the
stands
story
for. I
that
can't remember. It's in German. It's like actually I have a pin right here. It's like see the F some are upside down. Let's see if I can show this, but. I don't know if that'll show up, but it's
it's
too
just a
dark. It's too
dark, yeah,
dark.
I
Yeah,
can't,
it's like
yeah,
no brass, but
yeah,
it's anyway. It's a I
right,
don't it's like four I don't know. It's four German words. I
yeah,
can't pronounce that. But
interesting.
anyway,
But the story
yeah,
that I got was it
yeah,
was physical fitness is first and foremost,
yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
the ad on TV was looking for members. They were just about to open. They were looking for members, and I'm thinking, geez, they're looking for members. Um, they must be looking for trainers. I
Mhm.
know what I'm doing because I had started competing in powerlifting actually in the Marine Corps,
Oh, okay.
and um, and then just fitness in general. So, and I hadn't taken any courses yet in college related to this, but I figure I knew I had the world by the gonads at that point. I knew everything. I
Yeah,
worked out.
yeah.
So I ended up getting an interview with the general manager of the club named Tom Laputka, and who ultimately became one of my role. Do you know the name Tom Laputka?
I don't know
Okay.
that name.
Well, so I ended up interviewing with Tom, and it was unlike any. I hadn't been to a lot of interviews at that point anyway in my life, but and it still. I mean, to this day, I haven't been like even job wise. I've been. I mean, I was at Princeton for like 35 years, so. And actually, I have a story about a job interview, how I got the job, which, but anyway, I'll say, remind me if I forget. But
Okay.
but anyway, so I mean, he's talking to me. He did most of the talk. I mean, it wasn't a lot of questions. It was like he was doing a lot of. He was running the show, and it was stuff. He's talking to me about strength curves, and cams, and momentary muscular failure, and overload, and negative work. He's talking about all this stuff, which I had no idea. It's all like he might have been speaking Greek. So at the end, he says, "The way I get to know somebody is I train with them." He goes, "When do you want to train?" I said, "How about tomorrow?" He goes, "Fine." So, and the just a quick backstory about Laputka is Laputka played professional football. He played up in Canada for Ottawa for a couple of years, and then the I don't know if you remember the World Football League from uh, the mid '70s, I guess it was.
I don't.
Well, the World Football League had a franchise in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Bell, and Laputka was from I think he grew up in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, but it's close enough to he always referred to Philadelphia as his town, like he owned the town, kind of thing. But uh, he got a phone call from the league, somebody from the league, and he said, we're starting up a new league, and we're looking for established players. And he goes, "What would it take to get you down here?" And again, Lapucka's playing up in the CFL at this point, and he Lapucka told me that he took the most salary he ever made. He added in money for being in the playoffs, money for being in the All-Star game, and so on. and he added money to that amount, and that's what he told the guy, and the guy goes, "We'll double it." And that's kind of why the league went out. But it only lasted a season and a half, and they
Okay.
were raiding a lot of the NFL teams. I mean, the player they look for the money,
Yeah.
and he played for the Philadelphia Bell, and then he finished up in Canada, uh, and I can't remember what team he ended up with, but the Edmonton Eskimos,
Hmm.
he finished up. But uh, during the off season, he heard about this Arthur Jones guy, and he traveled to Florida and would train with Arthur Jones in the off season. So he would consider himself, and Lepeka would, besides being a former football player and who loved a good bar fight. I mean, he just loved fighting. Like he would tell me that uh, he'd go out intentionally looking for a fight. Like he'd go crash when he was in college. He'd just go crash a frat party just to fight.
Yeah.
So he loved to fight. Loved the concept of being on a football team. You know, the physicality of that.
Mhm.
And he had competed in powerlifting, including he was at the point anyway, and now it's more common. But he was first one of the first 500-pound bench pressers in the world. But so he goes down. He was training with Jones, and he was like amongst the like Casey Viators of the world. You know, he was like
Sure.
a Jones guinea pig.
Yeah. Yeah.
So had the uh, a guy named Stan Brasloff uh, somehow got wind of Nautilus in general, and he decides to open up a club, call it the 4F Club, and he hires Tom Lepetka as the general manager. So the next day, I showed up for the workout, and he just beat me up, and I don't remember anything specific about it other than like I mean I wasn't used to training to fatigue. You know, I wasn't used to controlled rep speeds.
Yeah.
You know, so that stuff was new to me.
Was it
But we had
all Nautilus
it
equipment
was
or?
all Nautilus. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was one circuit of Nautilus, but they had like every at that point they had just about every machine possible. They had and especially old uh the double machines, so the
Sure.
double chest, double shoulder, pull over torso arm, behind the neck lat pull down. They had a hip and back, prone leg curl, a compound leg, which had the leg press and leg extension. They had a shrug, shoulder shrug. They had a multi biceps, multi triceps, uh, and they had a multi exercise machine. And what it was a men's only club. It was $400 a year. I remember this in 1980.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah. I was
mean,
born.
I in my retirement, I joined a Planet Fitness. I'm paying like less than that, like
Yeah.
40 plus years later. You
Yeah.
know, but they had quite a memory. It was a successful club. It was you trained. It was by appointment only. You went through your first three workouts with a trainer, and you went through the circuit, and you weren't allowed to deviate from the circuit. I mean, unless it was something like where you wanted to during your upper body, you want to go over and do dips or chins and then get back into the circuit. But pretty much you had to follow an established routine. And where the club went, uh, kind of like a side note, is the club uh, went south was that they tried to expand too quickly. So the goal was they wanted to uh, wanted to open up a women's side. They had rented out or bought a huge warehouse. So only part of the warehouse was being used at this point, but the plan was to expand to a women's only club, as well as in between they were going to have a co-ed club with two circuits. So they're going to have four circuits
Hmm.
total, and they just tried to pull it off too quickly, and it didn't work. I mean, they had a
Machines are
good thing
expensive.
going.
Also.
They had a good thing going. It was something to be. It meant something to be part of the club because those guys knew. I mean, we worked them pretty hard, and they, it was almost like a badge of honor being a member at that club.
Hmm. So
One of
so I
the
guess your workout with him went well because you got the job is what
Yeah, I got the job as a
yeah.
trainer.
Yeah.
And a Marine, I didn't serve with the guy, but a former Marine too. He was on the Marine Corps wrestling powerlifting, but he got hired as a trainer too. And LaPutka told us later on that we were hired to enforce club policy, quote unquote. So we had a library of books at the club, and it included books by the Arthur's book, not Darden's books. It had Jim Peterson had a couple of his books there, uh, and Dan Riley, the book by Dan Riley. It turns out Dan Riley was the strength coach at Penn State at the time. So I'm at, fast forward a little bit, but in the fall of it was just a summer job at this fitness place. So end of the summer rolls around, got to go to Penn State main campus. So I go out there and I take ultimately as a phys ed major. Uh, Penn at the time they had these. You had to take like 10 or 12. They call them activity courses, and the activity courses were they were as demanding as a 3 credit course, but they were only worth 1 credit. And what it did, you took an activity course, and not only did you learn how to do the activities, but you also had to learn how to coach the activities. So, for example, one of the courses was like archery, another was ice skating, basketball. So you're learning the ins and outs of these sports as well as doing them. And Penn State at the time was, I don't think they do it anymore, but it was interesting because a lot of the sport coaches actually taught these classes. So I took a gymnastics coach, and a men's gymnastics coach was the instructor for the course I took.
Yeah.
I took a wrestling course, and the instructor was the former head wrestling coach, Bill Cole, who was like a 3-time national champ for University of Northern Iowa back in the day. So there's a strength training course offered, and who's teaching the course but Dan Riley. So I take the course by Dan, and I had already read his book like multiple times, like that we used in class. I knew it inside and out. So we took the class, and I was in the last class that he taught before he went to the Washington Redskins. Uh, and he stayed in the NFL. He was with the Redskins for like 19 years, and he finished up with the Houston. Joe Gibbs brought him on in like '82, and he stayed there for 26 years. Then went to the Houston Texans, finished up there, but he had 26 years in the NFL. But so I'm learning this stuff. I mean, we're doing these what's now known as HIIT, high intensity training. We're doing this at this club in Pennsylvania. The strength coach at Penn State's doing it with the players up there. So I'm thinking there's something into it, or something in it, or to it. And at the next year, I had to do a practicum, and I did it with a guy named Paul Kennedy, who was an assistant strength coach at Penn State, and he was also responsible for training the wrestling team, Penn State wrestling team. So I hooked up with him, and we're training Penn State wrestlers. And to fast forward a little bit, I graduated in May of '83. And so here's the story before I forget here's my job interview for how I got to work at Princeton. So
So you just had a summer job. Was that just a summer job at the gym? Was what you were working with Nautilus gym? And then
yeah,
so now you're
yeah.
going through your degree.
So
Now
I
you're,
graduated
yeah,
from
yeah.
college in '83, and I had been in communication. I was moving out to New Jersey. I was dating a woman in New Jersey from a classmate at Penn State, and she got a job in New Jersey, the Princeton area. They're actually in Princeton. And I would come out to visit while I was a senior. I would come out to visit, and I would train. I was training at the Princeton University gym, the campus facility. And I had written the fitness guy, Gary Kilpatrick. I had written him before inquiring about jobs, and he never like returned my job. And this is the old day where there's no email or anything like that. The old style, you're writing
Sure.
and dropping in the mailbox. So I introduced myself, and I'm still trying to hit him up for a job, and there's nothing, or he wouldn't even reach out to me. So I graduate from Penn State, and it was Memorial Day weekend. It was this weekend,
Hmm.
in '83. I'm working out. It's Friday. I'm working out in the campus facility, and he comes up to me and he says, "You still want to work?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Can you work this weekend?" And I said, "Yeah." And it was pretty much the interview, like literally, because the thing is that he had somebody that was set up to work, who bailed on him. So he split.
So
So this guy
what's the
had a
job?
choice. Say that again.
What's the job?
It was called a at the time it was called a health fitness supervisor. But basically, you're supervising the weight room, in the camp in the gym, campus gym. So he had a choices. Either he either had to hire somebody like fast, or he had to work. That was his choice, and he opted to. I mean, literally, that was it. I knew very little other than that. I knew where to punch my time clock, and that was pretty much it. I was left on my own.
So before
So
you
that's
get
how I got the job at Princeton.
Yeah, and that's a whole nother section. So before we get into that quickly, what were your thoughts on you've been training for your teenage years into your early 20s, and then you started seeing these high intensity training, and it's kind of different than what you've been doing probably
Oh yeah,
prior. So
yeah, a
what were
lot
your
different.
thoughts on that? And
Well, here it didn't. In so I got that Marine Corps mentality. Just to put it in perspective, I got that powerlifter mentality. So I'm into and uh I mean that back then it was like high volume kind of
yeah,
stuff.
that's
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 what
what I
kind
mean.
of
It's
like
difference. Yeah.
most people were doing. So I'm hearing this stuff. I'm like, okay, they're doing this stuff which is really different than I'm used to. It's working, but I didn't think it was for me because I was a former Marine. I was a power lifter. Yeah, I just didn't think it was right for me. They're doing at Penn State again. Okay, it's okay for the varsity athletes, but it's still in my head. I wasn't making that connection. I still it works. It's okay for them, but not for me. So then I'm at the yeah, I'm gonna go back to that story, but uh, so I'm at Princeton in like early '84, and I hear that uh, Rutgers, which is like 20 miles away, 20 miles north of Princeton, Rutgers University, they just hired a guy from Penn State. I think Dick Anderson, and I think he was the offensive coordinator at Penn State at the time. They hired him as the head football coach. So I sent off a resume as the strength coach from Rutgers. At some point, Dane Riley's a strength coach, and thinking, I have a teaching degree basically, but I really didn't want to teach unless I absolutely had to. But strength coaching sounded pretty cool, so I had an interest in that, and so I'm thinking, Penn State connection. He's going to be usually if you when a new coach and starts at a school, he brings his own people in. So I'm thinking, let me give it a shot. So I sent him my resume in, didn't hear anything back from him, but Dick Anderson names Paul Kennedy as the strength coach, who I did a practicum with at Penn State. So I called Paul up and I said, Paul, I'm like right down the road if you need me. He goes, oh, I know you there. He goes, first chance to get, I'm bringing you up here. And he brings me up there in the fall of '84, later that year, and I was the first assistant strength coach that Rutgers ever hired, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Uh, to this day, I'm really proud of that. Paul was the second, to my knowledge, Paul was the second strength coach, the head strength coach that Rutgers ever hired. They had a former power lifter before him, but so Paul brings me up there in the fall, and so I worked part time. I was part time at Princeton. I was working like 15 hours a week or something like that. But I did that from May, right after I graduated, from till like August, September ish of '84, '83 to '84. I go up to Rutgers and assistant strength coach. And again, though I've been really lucky in career wise. I've always been in the right spot at the right time. And I didn't have to interview for this job. I mean, Paul knew me from Penn State. There was no job interview there. So I'm in at Rutgers without an interview. Although I technically did, because my job started as part time. I was working full time hours, but I was part time. But they elevated my position after my first year, so that I had that. Uh, it's a state school, they're getting state money, so they had to post it, and I interviewed then, but it was still like because I was already in the job, it wasn't a big deal. The interview I had to interview with a couple of athletic directors and all. So I'm up there with Paul, but in March of '85, I'm working out in the football weight room, and back then I was doing 4 hour workouts, total body workouts 3 times a week.
Are you talking about for yourself
So
or for the athletes that you were?
no, this is me.
Okay.
We're training athletes the same way we did at Penn State. we're trained. I was working with Paul was responsible. There was a two-man. We had over 1,000 athletes at Rutgers. They had like 29 sport, no, 31 sports, I think. They had they had like two. The revenue sports were football and men's basketball, and then there was everything else. They were considered non-revenue at this point. So we had like over 1,000 athletes, and Paul did mostly. I helped out with football and men's basketball, and then I was responsible for all the other non-revenue sports I was responsible for. And so I'm in there working out one morning, and again, it's my typical. I just started chest, and I'm on a Nautilus double chest machine, and I'm in between sets, I'm just starting to think. I'm like, for whatever reason, I'm like, okay, 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. That's 12 hours a week times 52 weeks. That's like 624 hours a year. That's like working out for the first 26 days of a year, almost a whole month.
Yeah.
Like, so almost like 1/12 of the year I'm spending in the weight room.
It doesn't even
I'm
count
like,
like sleep time versus
what's
that. And
that?
I say if you don't take away your sleep time, it's even a larger
Yeah,
percentage of the
yeah.
times that you're awake.
So that was what I consider to be my epiphany. I said, you know what? I've known about this stuff for a long time. I never really truly gave it a shot. I would do it every now and then, but I was still settled on those 4 hour workouts. And I said, you know what? Let me give it a shot. And that was in 85. And I've done different versions of it over time, but that's basically how, my epiphany in terms of that was a selling point more or less. I mean, I knew about it, but
Yeah, yeah.
it was really sobering once I started doing the math on the time it was
Understand.
eating up so much time.
So tell me about the getting into strength coaching in the early 80s. So like strength coaching probably really started
Ah,
football and stuff in the mid to late 70s,
yeah,
really. And before that there was some athletes that trained probably on their own, but it was frowned
yeah,
upon, and they were probably using the Olympic lifts a lot still at first, and things like that.
oh yeah.
So
This is good stuff.
yeah, so like how
So
did I feel like HIT kind of developed along with sports and football a lot. Maybe I don't know if it's partially because of the time thing or because they started getting some science behind them in some ways, maybe, which I guess you got into with all your papers. But could you kind of talk about the time and what people thought of you as a strength, not like personally, but just like the job as strength coach? Like didn't really exist probably for a lot of parts, a lot of people.
yeah,
So kind of
this this is a
what the world look
really
like then when you
it's a re yeah, really, really interesting stuff you're asking here,
Mhm.
especially from historical standpoint. So if we go, um, the first collegiate strength coach is considered to be Boyd Epley at the
Mhm.
University of Nebraska,
Sure.
and his backstory is he was a track athlete. He was a pole vaulter who hurt he was injured, and I believe it was his back, and he was into weights. He's an undergrad student at this point. Uh, and was in the weight room working out. Some of the football players saw him in there. He started working with them. And I'm doing the fast forward version of
Sure.
this. Ultimately ends up in the office of, and I can't think of the name of the head coach back then at Nebraska, but
Say those in breath.
um, guy, he gets wind of that. I understand that you're working out some of my players. And again, this is 1970. You still had that muscle bound kind of like fear, among
Mhm.
other things. So he hired Epley as the legend goes, he hired him to work with his football team. And a deal was something like if anybody uh, gets slower, you're fired.
Yeah,
Something like that.
something like that. I've heard it too, but something like that.
So he's considered to be the first, and we'll round up the numbers. Let's say it's 1970. So he was considered to be the first collegiate strength coach. And if you look at a generation being 20 years long, I was sort of like when I started strength coaching, I was sort of like the second half of the first generation of
Hmm.
strength coaching. And here's where the industry was at that point is that those early strength coaches where it caught on, Nebraska had a consistently excellent football team back back then. Um, And as in a sporting world, often what happens is athletes and coaches, they look at other programs that are successful and they try to copy them. In fact, when I was at Rutgers Dick Anderson, when he got hired as the football coach from Penn State, offensive coordinator at Penn State, he comes to Rutgers. He brought over like almost all the staff had some kind of Penn State ties, like the position coaches, Paul Kennedy, and so on. Me, I had Penn State ties, and the newspapers, the local newspapers, nicknamed us Penn State East because we had that Penn State flavor to us. So you're always looking at, and Penn State was a successful program back then too, but you're always looking at successful programs, or coaches and athletes do, and try to copy them. So they got other schools got wind of Nebraska having a strength coach, and other schools started to hire their own strength coaches. And so who were they hiring? Well, the mentality back then was like, well, who could lift a lot of weight, right? Who was big and strong, could lift a lot of weight? They must know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So the first generation of strength coaches, many of them, the majority of them, were mostly former powerlifters or
Sure.
current powerlifters. Some Olympic style lifters, but mostly they tapped into powerlifting.
Mhm.
And what naturally would do, I mean, if you're a powerlifter, you get hired, as a strength coach, you're going to implement a powerlifting program.
Yeah.
So a lot of the programs back then were doing, it was strength training, but it's really powerlifting program. Um, and there were some exceptions though, like the Dane Riley at Penn State. You had Mike Gittleson at Michigan, and these are over time. This is necessarily in the '70s, but by the like '80s, you had these guys popping up. You had a Joey Bullock at Wake Forest. You had us at Rutgers. You had a uh, Sean Brown, who was with us at Rutgers and then went to Providence, who ended up at University of Kentucky. So you had all these, like you had a Brad Bates who was at a University of Colorado.
Are you saying these
So
are
there were
like high
pockets
intensity
of this
guys?
high intensity training
Gotcha.
being
Yeah.
done at the pro level. You had when Dan Riley left for the Redskins, then you had Kim Wood at the Bengals. You had John Dunn, a Penn State guy. A lot of them had Penn State ties. John Dunn with the first the San Diego Chargers and then later the New York Giants. You had Steve Wetzel, who was with the Vikings. You had Bobby Rigucki, who was he had been at West Point and he was with the Arizona Cardinals. I don't remember if the franchise was in Arizona at that point, but or when he got hired. But but you had John Thomas at Penn State. You had Jeff Watson at
A
Villanova.
lot. Yeah.
So there were
Yeah.
a lot of these. Uh, it was out there, and it was kind of like here's where the story gets kind of interesting: is you had these two really distinct schools of thought or camps.
Yeah.
You had what's become known now as the high intensity camp, high intensity training, and you had basically non-hit.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of heated debates about this, about the type of training that should be done, and a lot of finger pointing. No, they're wrong. We're right. No, this, no, that. And if you went down a list of like categories, you talk about or variables, and they were like distinct opposites. You had total body workouts, split routines. You had explosive movements. You had slow control movements. You had total uh, 2 or 3 times a week, 5 or 6 days a week. Left, right, up, down, night,
Yeah.
day.
Yeah.
It was like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
opposites, like
And
right
there's
down
also
the scale.
no real science at that point, really. I mean,
I would call it. It probably was closer to pseudoscience than science at
yeah.
that point.
But
I
I mean,
mean,
it was just starting. There wasn't really like
it was really in
scientific
its infancy.
papers or
Yeah,
writing and peer
yeah,
reviewed and all that stuff didn't exist,
yeah,
really.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and then of course you had the National Strength and Conditioning Association, and I went to uh, the 1984, which I'm trying to remember what number that was. It was probably about the sixth one that they had, but it was in Pittsburgh, and I went there. And Pittsburgh that was interesting because there were a lot of these. It started to be you had this feel for it was more than debates. I mean, they were like serious clashes between the two camps. Um, but you had Ken Manny was at University of Toledo, who ended up at Michigan State. He was in the high intensity camp and so on. But so in Pittsburgh was interesting because you really get that sense being there about this. There was tension in air. There's also tension in air back then too because of steroids are starting to become a major issue.
Hmm.
in college sports. And I remember one of the sessions I went to was a panel discussion on steroids, and one of the guys on the panel was Fred Hatfield.
Hmm.
And at one point, Fred made the comment. He was a former Marine, by the way. Fred made the comment that, uh, I mean, this is like a direct quote. Why do people use steroids? I don't know. Maybe they're tired of being wimps, right? So the
The
other
Fred
thing about that,
Hatfield, Dr. Squad, first guy supposedly
uh,
squat 1,000
yeah,
pounds, all that. Yeah.
yeah. So
Yeah.
the other thing that came up in that panel discussion was there's a guy, Virgil Knight, who at the time was the strength coach at Auburn. He ended up going to, again, this is '84. Uh, he left Auburn for the Packers shortly after, but at the time of the convention, he was at Auburn. Uh, he says he makes the comment at some point during the in front of people attending the panel discussion. He mentions that Bill Kazmaier has been selling steroids to kids, and so
This is on
in the
stage. He
back of the
said
room,
this.
what's that?
He said this on stage, like taught lecturing, or
No, no. Well, Virgil, he was one of the attendees, so he's in the audience,
okay.
and I don't know how this ended up being what prompted him to say this,
Uh-huh.
but he said it. Bill Kazmaier has been selling stories to kids, and all of a sudden, a guy in the back, just this enormous guy, stands up, and he goes, "Bill Kazmaier never sold steroids to anybody." It was Bill Kazmaier. And Virgil was sitting close to the front. Bill was all the way in the back, just this massive man. And he had, I don't know if you, well, this would have been before your time, but uh, Banlon shirts were in. Banlon was basically like spandex. So
Okay.
imagine like a shirt, a polo shirt, spandex. I mean, that's
Okay.
what Bill, it was like the biggest Banlon shirt in history he must have been wearing.
Mhm.
But he pointed his finger towards Virgil. And he wasn't like aggressive. He just said Bill Kazmaier never sold steroids to anybody. And Virgil turns around and he sees this mammoth guy there and he puts his hands up and he goes, "No, no, Bill, I wasn't talking about you." And I'm thinking, you just said his name. And Virgil must have wet himself, right
Buddy.
there on the spot. But so
Yeah.
anyway, it was and these debates went on for years and years and years, like who had and sometimes, the thing is like um going back to what I was mentioning before about people being critical of other programs, and a lot of times too is where you the camp that you ended up eating at, like whether you're in the high intensity camp or the other camp, the non high intensity camp, that dictated jobs a lot.
Mhm.
So if you're in a like um, Dick Anderson, let's go back to him. He's at Penn State. Strength coach is Dan Riley. He likes what Dan's doing. The players like what Dan's doing. The team is pretty successful. So so he gets another job. Happens to be Dick Anderson. He gets another job. Who's he going to get? He's going to get a Dan Riley clone.
Yeah.
He's going to get a Dan Riley program clone. You have to run a program like that. Um, so again, you're interviewing for a job. You got to know like this coach's backstory, like where he's from, and like who did he pass along the way? Did he have a favorable impression? And there's some coaches that's what they lean towards. They lean towards the high
Sure.
intensity camp. Others towards you get somebody from a coach coming from Nebraska. They take another. They're getting a Boyd Epley program.
Mhm.
They're going to get a Boyd Epley assistant, a Boyd Epley program. And I think it was really fortunate for me that I ended up at fate would have it at Penn State, uh, and getting exposed to Dane Riley and the Tom Laputkas of the world, and it just all made sense to me, that type of training.
Yeah.
I don't know what would have happened if I ended up at a school like Nebraska. I don't know if that would have maybe that would have made sense to me, you
Yeah.
know.
Did
But
Arthur Jones ever show up at any of these conferences?
uh, none. I think he pretty much. I think where he was going mostly were these the bigger conventions with the when like the vendor area. So Nautilus would have a booth. He
Mhm.
may show up at those, but I think for the most part, I may be totally wrong on this, but I think for the most part, he basically stayed. He hunkered down in the area of Central Florida. A couple of quick Arthur Jones stories. Now that you
Yeah.
brought him up, is The first time I met him that I remember, and it was like in kind of like almost like a hi, how you doing kind of thing, was I was visiting. This was 80, I think it was the tail end of 83. I was visiting Florida and I was on vacation and I decided to visit Lapetka. And as it turns out, Nautilus was having a conference at that point. I don't know if they call it a workshop or whatever, a clinic. And he introduced me to Jones there. The next time was and again, it wasn't memorable. It was just kind of hi, how you doing kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Um, the next time was more memorable. This was 86, like May of 86. And Arthur had just written an article that was in the Athletic Journal called Exercise 1986, The Present State of the Art. And at the end of the article, it had an offer. And the offer was that if you worked I think you had to be a doctor, if you were if you were practicing in the area of rehab, they would they offered to Nautilus, Arthur offered to fly you down to Florida, all expenses paid, and they would put on a clinic for you, and they would fly you back. So I was talking to well, I'm at Rutgers at this point. I'm showing Paul this thing, and I said, so what do you think? He goes, give him a call. There was a toll-free number. He's give him a call and see. So I call him up, and poof, before you know it, we're on a flight down to. They flew up to. Arthur had two jets.
Mhm.
He flew one up on this particular day. He flew one up to Teterboro, New Jersey, and he picked up. There was a pilot and a stewardess, and that was it. And there was me, Paul. We took another assistant strength coach with us, um, our team physician, and our head athletic trainer. So there's five of us. Flies us down to Ocala,
Mhm.
and another plane, his other plane, flew up to Ohio, and I don't remember what town, but they picked up a group of people from a physical therapy place. So they fly both of us down to Ocala. They put on a clinic for us, just us. There's like 12 of us there,
Yeah.
and they were doing this like every day of the week for months. I can't even imagine how much money this is
Yeah.
costing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so we're down there, and at one point, one of the guys from Nautilus, he knew, he kind of knew me and Paul anyway, like our names, and he went and told Arthur because Arthur's. I mean, if you think one word to describe Arthur, and if you're being kind, you'd probably say abrasive, right?
Rough,
So
abrasive.
real
Yeah.
abrasive,
Yeah.
combative, that kind of stuff. And so he's like looking for a fight. He's like nobody knows what they're talking about except for him. He's already thinking that the people in the audience they have this mindset that's a different mindset than him. One of the guys from Nautilus recognized us, like our names or whatever, and he went over and told Arthur that quote unquote these guys are our friends. Meaning,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're
They're
cool,
already drinking the
kind of stuff.
Kool-Aid a little bit.
Yeah. So we got the rundown of the medical at this point, what became medics testing equipment
It was
was
right
part
around
of
there, right? Yeah.
Nautilus. And this is basically what he was using. And he asked for some volunteers to do a test, and I volunteered. And it was,
That's cool.
the medical testing piece it was a motor driven, and I'm doing my best at describing the device, and I'm trying to stay in my lane here. But it was a motor driven unit, and the test that I did, it was on my left leg, and they strapped you. It was a leg extension, so they strapped my leg to the movement arm, the pad, and what I had to do is the machine was set to move at like a certain speed of movement, and I don't remember what it was. I think it was like a 4-second concentric and a 4-second eccentric. And what you had to do, so it would go up and it would go down. And the idea was that on the way up, you had to you had to push against that pad as hard as possible, and it would capture like your force output, your
Hmm.
torque.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it got to the point, and at the point where your leg is straight, it's fully contracted, and then it would if I remember right, there was a slight pause for the machine to switch over I'm using the best I can describe it, and then it would drive back down at whatever speed it was, and you had to resist,
Hmm.
and you could not stop it. Again, it was like trying to fight a bulldozer. I mean, you just
Yeah,
couldn't stop it.
it's different.
And
Yeah.
again, you're resisting against this pad, and it would pick up amount to your eccentric force output, and on the way up, your concentric force output, and it was doing it to fatigue.
Mhm.
So every rep was like maximum effort. I was used to train hard, but not like that hard. And at one point, fortunately, my leg was strapped to the pad
Uh-huh.
because it was basically lifting up my leg up, and you could see on the screen like my force output. It
Yeah.
was like at the point, it was like I mean, I could resist more in the negative, but I couldn't raise my leg. I mean, it was just
Yeah.
picking my
Yeah.
leg up
Getting weaker and weaker.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I remember Jones saying, "We call that the whip factor." So on the way back to New Jersey, I had to sit in the aisle with my leg. My left leg was like in the aisle. I couldn't straight. It was just like dead meat. I mean, he
Uh-huh.
just and I was sore for like days from that.
That's
And then
cool.
went back there one more time. I met him was in I want to say it was like 94 ish, maybe 95. At this point, he was with MedX, and MedX was we were considering buying MedX. I was back at Princeton at this point. So I was at Rutgers from 1984 to 90. I went back to Princeton in August of 90. And a few years into it, we were considering buying medics equipment for the varsity weight room. And medics was putting on a clinic in Gainesville, Florida. It was near where, in fact, we got a tour of it. The Gainesville, I think it was called the Gainesville Athletic Club or Gainesville Racket and Athletic Club. Joe Cirilli, I don't even know that name, but he had a ton of the equipment. And yeah, I just went up and I reintroduced myself to Arthur, and it was like that was pretty much the conversation.
Let me ask you about Arthur in that what was your and also other strength coaches' general perception of Arthur Jones? Because I've met many, well, not many, but I met people who grew up with him and almost like worshipped Arthur. And I've met several guys that almost like talk and almost like taking on his personality, like his gruff personality. Like they like this is like become a thing that this is a way that you can talk to people and you're smarter than everyone. And and so I've seen that kind of I won't say worship, but kind of idolization of him. And then I wonder if there's a different group of people that, maybe liked his concepts and stuff, but didn't agree with everything. Or I don't know, what was the general community of strength coaches' thoughts of Arthur? Because he didn't really come from the strength coaching perspective. He came originally, just, well, trying to sell machines and first going in through bodybuilding, then to the sports and medicine later on.
Yeah, you're right on so many counts. I mean, first of all, there was a group, and I think it's a case where if you're around somebody who you respect, you pick up like different mannerisms.
Mhm.
Like, and I remember one story. I don't know if it was true or not, but I remember one story. They said there was a drill instructor. I don't know where it was, Parris Island or San Diego, and I think we were being told about how you have to be careful because recruits will pick up on these little idiosyncrasies you might have. And and the story was that the drill instructor walked with a little bit of a limp for whatever reason. And like they're saying, like all the recruits in the platoon were walking with that same limp. They had just picked up on it.
Uh-huh.
So I think they're going back to your point about Arthur. I think there were a number of individuals who tried to be like Arthur,
Mhm.
especially after his death. They tried to fill that void in there and be the next Arthur. And who am I talking about? I mean, like, I think the one that pops in my mind, and I think what you and many of your listeners are familiar with is Mike Menser,
Mhm.
for example. I think he tried to be like Arthur.
Mhm.
I think there was the guy who branched off into super slow, Ken Hutchins. He
Mhm.
tried to be like Arthur. I think to some degree, Ken Leisner, who I met a number of times, I think he tried to be like Arthur. And when I say try to be like, I mean, you're picking up different phrases that they might use or styles or
Mhm.
whatever, and they try to be as Arthur was, he wasn't like he was the antithesis of being warm and fuzzy,
Yeah.
very abrasive, but he would assume right out of the blocks that you're stupid,
Yeah.
that you didn't know anything, and he was almost like an equal opportunity employer because he insulted everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, there was no, he didn't draw the line. I mean, uh, football coaches, bodybuilders, powerlifters, doctors. I mean, he would insult everybody.
Yeah.
Uh, and I think there was a group of people trying to be like Arthur, trying to fill that gap, so to speak.
Yeah, I can see
And
it.
I think, obviously, going back to another point you made, there was another group of individuals who, and you took, and they were like maybe like I wasn't around him enough to copy him or any mannerisms or any lingo, and it's not my personality. Like his personality was different than mine, but I took what I mean. He made a lot of sense. He was ahead of his time, I thought. Uh, he introduced concepts. I mean, maybe those concepts were around before him, uh, like low volume training, for example, or training to fatigue. Some of the concepts, the machines with cams and all. Maybe he's not the guy who came up with it, but he's certainly the guy who popularized it.
Mhm.
But what I took what I could in terms of like information wise, and I tried to just using a different delivery. But there was another group that, and I think most of us were probably like that in the hit camp, where we had different personalities than Arthur. I mean, Arthur's personality was unique to be so by default.
Mhm.
I guess we had different personalities,
Yeah.
but I mean, you took the it the information that he was dispensing, which again was really ahead of his time, and you tried to implement that as best you could. But I think the other group, usually the non-hit camp, I mean, they were like, the guy's a kook, he's a crackpot. He's like, they want to get in fights and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I think it was exactly what you said. How he was received.
Kind of both camps there. Both different ways of looking at
Yeah.
him, which I can see. So now we're working and we're being an assistant strength coach, and you did that for some years until you became the head.
So I went back. So here's the thing about Rutgers was in at the end of 1989, after the end of the football season, Dick Anderson gets reassigned, and they didn't fire him. Dick had a unusual contract. He had a 5-year rollover contract, meaning like every year he had a 5 year. It just rolled over to the next year, right? So if they got rid of him, they would have to eat his contract, and I don't know how that would have worked out, but uh, they probably figured let's reassign him. He's going to leave eventually on his own, but we'll just stick him in an office somewhere. And Dick's worst. Dick was a great guy. He's still alive, as far as I know. Real great guy, honest as they come. Smart. Uh, not much of a personality, but anyway, his the worst thing he could do, he did. He was successful right out of the blocks, like his first year at Rutgers. I think his first year, I think they were 7-3, and back then, I mean, it's a 10-game season back then, and there were only like I think there were probably like 14, 16 bowl games back then. Now there's like way more than double that. 7-3 is going to get you in a pretty decent bowl game nowadays. Back then, it wasn't. Especially Rutgers had some image problems, but like nobody knew where Rutgers. It wasn't a school like you knew, like Nebraska. You knew where Nebraska was. You knew where Penn State was, but where's Rutgers?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So it had a bit of an image problem. The very next, so he's 7-3. The next year, the first game of the year is down in Gainesville, Florida, against the University of Florida, who's ranked number 3 in the country at the time. Rutgers goes down there and they come away with a tie. They tied the number 3 team in the country away in their house. 7-3-1. That's Dick's first 11 games. And it was kind of like downhill after that. It just never meshed. I mean, some schools, I mean, and we're playing like a big. Rutgers was an independent, so was Penn State. They weren't in a league back then; they weren't a conference. But the Eastern schools would play each other, like the West Virginia, Boston College, Pitt, Syracuse. We'd all play each other. Army was on the schedule every year. Temple was in the mix there too. So 89, I don't remember what the record was, but it wasn't good. And so they reassigned Dick Anderson. And then they reassigned Paul Kennedy. Paul Kennedy was working with, he was football primarily, and they reassigned him to the facility that I was in. And Paul says to me when this was going down, he goes, they're going to ask you to be the head strength coach. And I said, I'm not going to take it. And he's like, what if they make you? I said, I'm not going to take it. I said, you're the guy, my loyalty's to you. You're the guy who hired me here. If I took the job, it'd be a slap in the face to you. I would do the same program that you're doing. And even then, it's a short-term thing. I know whoever they bring in here as the football coach, they're going to bring in their own staff. So I'm out the door anyway. So I'm going to go out with my head high, held high. And meanwhile, and my contract was to expire the end of June of that year of 90. Paul was also teaching at Rutgers at that point. Paul had his EDD, so he had a doctorate degree. And he was teaching a weight training class through what was then called the Department of Exercise Science and Sports Studies. So he did that in the fall. He was scheduled to teach in the spring. Meanwhile, he gets cut loose by football, and there were a number of football players that were taking this class. Paul didn't want to teach the class. He thought it would be humiliating because there's football players in the class. He's no longer their strength coach. They knew him that way, and it was just kind of humiliating.
Okay.
So he goes and meets with the head of the department at the time, Ed Bryzcki, and he tells Ed, he goes, "I'm not going to teach the class in the spring." Ed goes, "You have to teach. You signed a contract." And Paul said, "Sue me." Yeah, we get. I think it was like $600 you got paid for teaching a class back, like a 7-week class. So Paul said to him, he goes, "I'm not going to teach, but I'll tell you what." He goes, "I could give you my assistant to teach the class." And Zambrowski, Ed didn't want me to teach because I never met him, but I have a bachelor's degree. Paul had a doctorate degree, and Ed had his reservations about me teaching the class, but he was between a rock and a hard place. He either hired me to teach the class instead of Paul, or he canceled the class, and he didn't want to cancel the class, so he hired me. And long story short is that even after I left Rutgers I actually got 2 more weeks out of him. My contract was over in June, but I squeezed 2 more weeks out of him. So I left there in like mid-July and ended up back at Princeton. And even when I got a phone call from Rutgers in the fall, and they said, "Can you teach in the spring?" And I said, "I don't know if you heard, but I'm not at Rutgers anymore." And he goes, "That's okay. We'll bring you back as a visiting instructor." I said, "Fine." So I just got it cleared through Princeton, that I'm able to do that. And I did that. I continued to teach there started in 90. I taught till 2012. And then I had a younger son, and the commute was, I'm working a job and a half, a younger son. The commute was like 40 miles round trip between Princeton and Rutgers. So I just had to resign from teaching at Rutgers. And then I got the itch to teach again in 2012. And, I've been teaching ever since. In fact, that's what I'm doing post-retirement from Princeton is I'm still teaching at Rutgers.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it was this like an intro to strength training course that you took taught for
Yeah,
22
originally,
years or?
yeah, it was designed. I mean, we were really at Liberty. I mean, the guy, the strength coach before Paul, the powerlifting guy, he was teaching that class before, and while he was a strength coach, and then when he left, Paul was teaching that course as well as the strength coach. And the guy, he was a power lifter. I'm sure that's what he was teaching in the course. So Paul was teaching more like a version of what Dane Riley taught at Penn State. And Paul's putting his own spin on it, his own style. And when I got the course, you know, I got parts of like Paul Kennedy in me. Like I picked up stuff from him. I picked up stuff from Dan Riley when he had Dan Riley's course, and I had stuff in my mind how I wanted to teach the course. But it's an introductory level, and to this day it is. And it was designed for exercise science and sports studies majors. So we're talking about anatomy, special populations, program design, a little bit of nutrition's in there, some practical applications. It's a 7 week. Yeah, we meet 14 times, twice a week for 7 weeks.
So tell me, during this time, so you were there first for 22 years and you continued teaching. But during this time is really when you looks like you started writing right around that time. I think I see the first. I mean, I have like the amount of articles you wrote is literally like, I mean, 500 articles here, and it looked like the earliest one was around 1989, I think, which was right around where you started there. It seems like
Yeah,
start teaching. So
yeah.
how did you get into
So
the
here's how.
academic and all writing all these articles for
Yeah.
everything, really?
Um, I had this itch to write back in it's probably like 83-ish. Once I got graduated from Penn State, pretty much, I wanted to write because I saw, all the stuff that, the Darden stuff, the Riley stuff. Dane had a column in Scholastic Coach at the time. There's different magazines with articles. I said the NSCA Journal. Figured, I think I got something to say. So I wrote an article called, and I was working with, when I first got to Princeton as a part time, I ended up uh, bumping into, for lack of a better term, Princeton wrestlers. I pulled some aside. I told them, I'd work with the Penn State wrestlers, graduate from yada yada yada. So they were game, and I ultimately met their coaches as well. But I was their strength coach. So I wrote an article called uh, uh, "Strength and Conditioning for Wrestling, Princeton Style," or something, or the Princeton Way, something like that. I think it was the Princeton Way, and I was trying to shop it around. So I sent it to the NSCA Journal. I sent it here, there, and it's getting rejected. So I mentioned it to, at some point I run into Tom Leputka, and I tell him the story, and he says, "Well, why don't you send it to the Athletic Journal?" And I said, "Well, why?" And he said, "We meaning Nautilus, we own the Athletic Journal."
Hmm.
So, so I sent article in, it gets accepted. Wow. So I write up another one. I think it was on neck training. I sent that in. That gets accepted. So now I got this like pipeline between me and the Athletic Journal, and of course, once you get that first article, and now you could take that and build and go. When you go to another publication,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
could say, "Hey, I was published in the Athletic Journal.
yeah, yeah.
I've had a couple articles." And then if you get them hooked on it, then you go to another magazine. You say, "Oh, I've been in the Athletic Journal. I've been in International Gymnast. I've written X number of articles," and
Yeah.
now you're just building your resume basically.
Yeah, I see it here. I was wrong. I was actually 2 pages off. So you were, yeah, strength and conditioning for wrestling, the Princeton Way, Athletic Journal, 65, number 4, November 1984.
November of
And
'84.
then it
Yeah,
looks like you had 4 of those articles in there. Then you had something in Matt magazine, and then
Matt Magazine would have been a
Wrestling
wrestling magazine.
USA. So and then kind of
Yeah,
expanding, just like you said, Scholastic Coach, Athletic Business, all types of
yeah.
things. Yeah.
So if we go to so now as time goes on, I'm building up a collection of these things that I've written, and this is like I'm thinking, and I started writing these articles with the idea of these could be individual chapters in a book. So in this would have been '88, I guess. Now I'm like, you know what? Let me see if and there's an interest in like what about writing a book? So I wrote to 6 different publishers, like Human Kinetics, the publishers at the time, and I'm getting rejection, rejection, rejection. So I'm like, and it's like, you know what? One more and I'm done. That's it. It's just not happening.
Mhm.
And I got wind of this. There was a small publisher in Indianapolis called Masters Press. They only did 12 titles a year, like one a month. That's all they would publish. And I don't remember who put me in contact with them, but I did. I have a feeling I don't want to say, but it almost has to be that person. But I sent in a proposal, gets accepted. And he says that this is like January of '89, and I'm talking to the guy. He said the only thing is we need your manuscript like in 5 months, or it was like 4 or 5 months, something like that. And I'm like, well, I guess I better get cooking here because I had a stockpile of other stuff that could be like standalone chapters, but I knew I had to beef those up and add new material and so on. But long story short, I got that done. I called it a practical course of strength training. It got published in late '89. Um, and this is before internet kind of stuff,
Mhm.
and it did really well. The first
What was
edition,
that? Because
such
I don't
that
actually see that on your list here. The earliest one I have on your publication of books was 95 with youth and Oh no,
that
no,
would have been
books
like,
and co-author was conditioning for basketball in '93, but I don't see
yeah, there was some, no, it was definitely 89, the first
okay.
one.
What was the name of
Uh,
it?
pra a practical approach to strength training
Hmm.
at that point.
Okay.
I quickly did a revised edition, a second edition. I mean, these things are selling well. I mean, y- I guess by anybody's standard, they don't were great, but they were pretty good. In fact, I shared that with, I don't know if you know the name Wayne Westcott.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was
Yeah,
talking to Wayne.
yeah.
Wayne's has a
I have
number of
some
books out. And
things.
at one point, I
Yeah,
was
I know
talking
the
to
name.
Wayne, and I told him like the numbers of sales, and he goes, "All my books added together didn't produce that many sales." So it was decent sales. I was happy with. So
I have no nothing to gear against, but what's like what is a book that does decent sales sell back then? I have nothing to
it sold. Uh, if I remember right, the first year it did like 5,000 copies, and by the second edition sold 5,000 copies, blew through that like pretty quickly, and
nice.
a couple years later went to which that third edition that you're talking about was in 93, no, 95 maybe was the third edition,
Mhm.
somewhere in there, 93, 94, 95.
Okay.
Uh, one interesting book too that I did, I think we talked about this before, was Maximize Your Training.
Yeah.
So I had this idea,
Right here actually. Oh,
yep,
oh,
I had this idea of solely putting an all-star cast, an all-star lineup together to each write a chapter. And I'm just doing like a list of like all the contacts that I had made over the years. And it was like a massive list. It was like it had to be like approach 50 some people. So I'm contacting them and telling them what the plan was and can you write a chapter on this? And uh, a couple of interesting stories related to that. That book did well too, but and I think it ended up with 34 authors, give or take, in there. I think Jan Dellinger's in there.
yeah, that's what I told
Um,
you was that this is I started lifting and training in the late '99, '98, somewhere around then, and this came out right around there, I believe 2000 it came out. Uh, and I had pretty quickly fell into some of the high intensity training stuff. And this was one of the earlier books I picked up after Stu
yeah,
McRoberts stuff. And I remember I'd had this book forever. I read it a long time ago, but I remembered the history section on it. And I interviewed Jan earlier, which I told you, and
yep,
Jan
yep,
Dellinger, and he actually, I did not remember that he had written the history chapter in it, Might and Muscle, Antiquity to
yeah,
Arnold, it
yeah,
said. But there's quite a few names that I recognize in here too. Bill Pish also wrote a article who
yeah,
I also
yeah,
interviewed. And some of the other guys. Oh, there's Wayne Westcott I see as well. I think did he
yep,
do the
yep.
high intensity newsletter? He had a newsletter. I don't know if that
No,
was.
that was Ted Lambrinides who did the newsletter.
Oh, okay, but I thought he had something.
Wayne was at the South Shore YMCA in Quincy, Massachusetts, like forever, and he literally traveled all over the world talking and writing. And then he left the YMCA and got a job at Quincy College in Quincy, Massachusetts. And he retired a couple years ago.
Hmm.
Well, so I've got this list of like 50 some people,
Yeah.
and I'm contacting them, and and little by little, the authors, it was kind of interesting, is that uh, there was a lot of infighting, I guess is the best way to put it. For example, one author would hear that another author or another person was involved, and I literally got an ultimatum from one author that said, if he's involved, I'm not involved. There's all this nitpick, it's like,
So this was also the time. This was late '90s, early '90s when the internet was first starting. And I don't know if were you involved on the internet like scene as far as people starting like
yeah, a
this was
little
when the
bit.
hit Jedi stuff came about and people were arguing.
That came about a little bit later. That was more of an inside joke between me, Bill, and another guy named Rob Spector. But there was another thing like early on. I think it was some kind of list serve, a weights list serve or something like that. I
Yeah.
started. That was my first foray into the internet stuff, and I didn't even know how to access that stuff after a while. So I was sending my material to an intermediary who would post it on the weights list.
Yeah, I remember I
Um,
was I was right around when I was a teenager around then, but listservs were kind of even before the World Wide Web. It was
yeah,
almost like just a message board, but no
yeah,
actual
yeah.
website. Sort of, it was its own thing.
And I didn't
But
know what I
that's
was doing.
but that's
So
what I
I was
hear. A lot
getting,
of people. It was so small, but a lot of the just people
Yeah.
that were interested
Yeah.
started to find each other
Yeah.
around that time. What
But it had these like a lot of these like nitpicking, like and literally, if he's in there, I'm not. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going with the other guy because if that's this guy's attitude, I don't want him on, part of this. Um, so that was, and it was like more than a couple of people, would say that if he's in, I'm not in it, kind of stuff.
it's
So
pretty annoying.
that caught me out. That surprised me. And the other thing, like one other quick note is that, so I do a lot of editing too.
Yeah.
I'm at the point where I actually can't help myself. I got to edit stuff. So I got an article or chapter from Ralph Carpinelli. I don't know if you know
I
that.
know the name, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I
So
think
he was at Delphi University,
yeah.
uh, a really respected researcher. And he was a guy he was almost like a myth buster kind of guy, where he
Okay.
would, whatever topic it was, like heavy weights for low reps, build size, high reps with lightweight builds muscle definition. So he would investigate the like he would just scour the literature and then write about it. Or his big one was on sets, like multiple sets versus single sets.
Sure.
He did a big one in 1998. But at any rate, the chapter he contributed was sort of like geared towards. It was an offshoot of that, the multiple set versus single set debate. And I'm used to editing these chapters that are coming in. Some are written better than others, obviously, but so his, like, I'm just tweaking it here and there, and to be consistent with um, the rest, the flow of the rest of the chapters, right? Because his was like really scientific-y, and
Uh-huh.
it didn't fit in, right, with the other like conversational kind of chapters. So I went and made these changes, and I sent him the changes, and I get a phone call. It's Ralph, and Ralph goes, you know, I noticed you made a lot of changes to my chapter. I said, yeah. And he goes, change it back. I go, what are you talking about? And I try to tell him, like, why? It's to be
Yeah.
consistent with, the other chapters and this and that. And he was insistent that change it back. And I can't tell you how much we spent on the phone. We went through every sentence,
Oh, jeez.
any word that I changed, any like period or comma that
Yeah.
I took out, or every single one of them ended up changing manually with him on the phone telling me, okay, in this sense, you did this, change it back. In this
Yeah.
sense, you did this, change it back. But
So
then
that's
being, that's almost coming up on 40 years old now, right?
no,
No, not 40,
2000.
30,
So 20,
30, coming up
26
on
years.
30.
No, coming up on 30. Yeah, coming up on
Yeah,
30. Especially when you
yeah,
start
stood
working
the
on
test of
powerlifting.
time.
So also someone I'm familiar with just because of where I trained and we talked about a little before. Tell me what you know, like what your interactions with Dr. Ken Leisner was, because he was involved in HIIT, but more I don't know,
Ken
more on
was,
the
Ken was a strength coach, strength personality, whatever you want to, a trainer up
Mhm.
in, I think it was in Valley Stream, New York, which is on Long Island.
Yeah.
And we got wind of, we meaning when we were at Rutgers, somewhere at Point Rutgers was the high intensity that hit newsletter came out. And usually, like almost every single issue, the lead article was Ken Leisner. And I think this was somewhere around when he was doing the steel tip as well. And we did a clinic. The first time I met Ken, I don't remember what year, it was probably like 88, maybe early 89. We did or maybe might have been the summer of 89, but we did a clinic, a strength clinic at Rutgers, and we invited Ken to come down and speak.
Mhm.
Uh, and then I went up into Long Island for a clinic. I ran into him there, and he might have put it on. I don't remember that one, but he might have been the orchestrated that one. And every now and then I'd into him at different hit focused conferences. Like there were a couple of in Cincinnati where Nautilus Midwest was located. There was one in '87. There was one in, it was either Hershey or Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And I'd run it, and typically, Ken would talk a little bit about, a little bit, and then he'd also train somebody. And he
Mhm.
usually trained Kevin Tolbert which
Sure.
is one of his adopted sons. Um, but another story related to Ken is that had a guy, one of Princeton students. I don't know if you know the name Tim Ferriss.
Sure.
So Tim, I think he wrote the 4 Hour Work Week. I think that
Yeah,
one stuff like
I've
that.
read his summits. I think I probably read that 15
Yeah,
years
and it
ago.
sold
Yeah.
insanely well.
Yeah, and he's a
So
great
Tim was
podcaster.
I knew him when he was an undergrad student at Princeton,
Hmm.
and probably more so than I, I knew him more so than many other students. Uh, he was a cool kid, but he had wrestled and done judo when he was younger, and we are trying to get him on the wrestling team, and he had shoulder problems. But how he came about, how I met him was I was, my office is in the fitness center, so I'm in just in this fitness center walking around. I see a guy train. He's training a muscle fatigue. He's slow controlled reps. I mean, you just don't see that in typical gyms.
Hmm.
So I went over and started talking to him, and it turns out he he had done some reading, the Dardens, the Jones material, and it made sense to him, and that's how he would train. So his senior year, I think it was his senior year, he knew I knew Leisner, and he wanted to know if I could talk to Ken to get him to put Tim through a workout. So got that all settled, and Tim went up to. At this point, Ken owned the Iron Island gym,
Sure. Hmm.
and he went to the Iron Island gym. Ken worked him out, beat the snot out of him,
Hmm.
and the thing too is like some of these trainers, they have a reputation for like just beating the snot out of you kind of
Yeah.
thing, and uh, you know, if you think about it, in order for you to do that, you have to have a really willing trainee. The
Yeah.
trainee's got to be willing to get the snot beat out of them,
Yeah.
right? So it kind of works both ways. But and of course you have to be skilled enough to get the most out of an individual. But long story short, Tim goes up there, he gets snot beat out of him, and Tim later reported he had, and I wish he could, because I can't do it justice, like the story, like how graphic it was. But
Mhm.
among other things, Tim told me that when he was done with the workout, he was laying down on the ground on his back, and he said just laying there, he could count his pulse, like he could
Oh,
feel his
sure.
heartbeat.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's how
Been there.
hard
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
heart was beating and blood flowing through his. Just laying there, he didn't have to do his carotid
Yeah.
pulse or
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
his
Yeah.
radial. He could
It's a
just
good. That's a
he
good
could count his
description.
pulse just laying there.
It's interesting because Tim later he had I think his big hit was like yes the 4 hour work week, but then he didn't write he wrote the 4 hour body I think later
Yeah,
on, and I
yeah,
think it was basically just talking about high intensity training. But it was I think
yeah,
I read it or skimmed through it or something years
yeah,
ago. But
yeah,
that's basically it was like oh I discovered this thing that you most of the results from this amount of work and working hard and
yeah,
just repackaging it basically.
yeah. So
But
Tim was,
yeah,
one other quick side story to this story was uh, I get a phone call from Jeff Watson, who was at Villanova at the time, strength coach at Villanova, Canadian guy. He was a shot putter at Michigan, and he met Mike Gilson, and Mike exposed him to high intensity training. But so Jeff called. He's at Villanova. He calls me up, and he goes. He said something like, "Hey, I just got a phone call from Dr. Ken. He said he beat the snot out of your guy, right?" So I'm paused for a second. I'm thinking through this. I'm like, "You kidding me?" I mean, there's like phone calls are being made about you know what had happened, and I just said to Jeff, and I said, "He's a really tough kid," meaning Tim Ferriss.
uh,
And Jeff said, "Yeah, I know. That's what Ken said."
that's good.
So you know, just a great personality, tough guy, real tough guy.
So you've been in,
Uh,
wrote all these books. I don't know, looks like a dozen books at least. All these articles. You were teaching students, and then you were also training, strength training, all the different sports athletes at Princeton there as well. What have you seen? So you've been doing this for now, what, 30 plus years, 40? It was like 90, 89,
depends
80s.
on when you start counting, but
Yeah, but yeah.
I mean, if you start counting in '80 when I at that 4F club, like over 45 years.
So what have you seen as far as the modern outlook on high intensity training versus you just see these waves of different things and different interests and people's I don't know what is your current
So
thoughts on
here,
how it's perceived now, its place in fitness versus, how it's developed. I don't know what is your thought on it in the world
here's
now?
just some random thoughts. I mean, nowadays, I mean, most people have no idea who Arthur Jones is, right? And I think, like you said before, things go in waves, and every now and then, the idea of training, hey, let's train a muscle fatigue. Wow, this is great stuff. Well, yeah, but that's been around since like the 70s,
Yeah.
and it like peaks and valleys along the way. But now it's like the hottest thing. Now another hot thing is like uh, eccentric work or negative work. Well, that was around in the 70s. I mean, it's been studied before that, but it was Jones was popular. A lot of these things Jones was popularizing, or proper technique. So I think that stuff is going on. Uh, it's all cyclical. I think nowadays too, you got these, and from the strength coaching profession,
Yeah.
I think those lines are like there's no longer two camps anymore. I don't know if there's any camps. I think it's just so blurred because along the way, what happened is that um, what you would see is like you're a professional athlete in the off season, you're hiring your own strength coach or your performance specialist or whatever you want to call them, right? So, and a classic example is Tom Brady. He had his own performance guy. He was in business with the guy. So you're the strength coach of the Patriots. You got Tom Brady, who first of all you got to work with arguably the greatest football player, not just quarterback, but most successful
Yeah.
football player of all time. You're going to go tell him he's got to go train his calves, or you're going to go tell him he's got to run 640s or something like that, right? So I'll run out of blocks is kind of awkward, and now he's bringing his own strength guy with him,
Mhm.
right? And there's been a couple of instances that I'm aware of where it got really where the guy shows up like a football player in particular. They show up at uh, camp, August camp for pro football, and they show up with their strength coach, their own personal strength coach.
It's different.
So I think being a strength coach, it's really tough nowadays, and it's not as glamorous as it sounds. And I think the other thing is that those lines are blurred. I don't think there's any of those two distinct camps anymore, the hit camp and a non-hit camp. I think you get most strength coaches nowadays, there's very, very few exceptions, I think. They do a lot of hybrid stuff.
Yeah.
They do some
Yeah.
high intensity, but they do some, non-high intensity stuff. And they're trying to cater. And I think it's in a way it's a smart thing because I mentioned earlier on that a lot of times your job is tied into like who you know and what you do as a strength coach. So if you're known as a high intensity guy and some other a football coach gets a job, there's no way you're getting hired there.
Yeah.
Or if you're a high intensity guy, your football coach leaves and they bring a new guy in, like I'm not gonna lie, I'm out of here. The guy's gonna, he's got to cut me loose.
Do you think
And
someone has
now
to I was like, do you think
because the
some of it has
lines
to do
are
with the
blurred now,
sciences? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you think some of the science has shown that it's kind of, like you said, blurred? Like, yes, intensity is important, but now we also look at
that could be
recovery and mobility and
sure,
endurance, and it's not really, it's more
that could be a
all
factor too.
encompassing, and it's not
Yeah,
so much cut and dry. And of course,
right.
everyone's body's different as well, of course. So
Yep.
there's just more information I don't know, it's just not as cut
Yeah.
and dry as they maybe,
Yeah.
you know,
And as a
reset
strength
this and
coach,
for the failure and
yeah,
type
as a
of
strength coach or a fitness guy or gal, you're more marketable because you're not tied into one camp or the other. And then you got nowadays the so-called fitness influencers.
yeah.
They're out there, doing what they do. And you got people, and I didn't realize this caught me off guard. I didn't know about this niche until one of my students at Rutgers mentioned it in class, and I don't know how it came up, but uh, and I looked into it. And I was like, I had no idea this stuff was going on. But they heavily, and I hate to use the word influence because it's in their name, but they're heavily influence, especially the college age,
Young
give or
people.
take a little bit.
Yeah.
The high school level and maybe a little bit post college, heavily influenced in terms of followers and what they're uh, how they're trying to do what the influencers tell them to do. And yet these influencers have very little formal education in
Yeah.
exercise science.
Yeah.
They're telling you what works for them, but
Yeah.
what works for them or what they eat, what they do doesn't mean it's gonna. If you eat and do the same thing, you're gonna get the same results.
I mean, that's his tale as old as time as
Yeah,
the Iron Game goes. It's just whoever looked the best told the people who didn't, but they were usually the genetic, freaks, or so they got
yeah,
would have worked. Anything would have worked for them. But even in the 90s when I started getting into training and stuff, yeah, even then I felt it was still most of what you found in the bodybuilding, weightlifting world was still volume, and you had to almost find it was almost like I mean the Nautilus and the high intensity was always there, but it was always also had to dig for it. And then with the internet, it started getting more of a platform, and more books came out, and it was more geared towards, like you said, you were thinking about how much time you would spend in the gym, but it wasn't just that. It was that a lot of genetically normal people, not necessarily you wouldn't, they called some was hard gainer, but really just a genetically average person didn't. A lot of the bodybuilding stuff didn't work, and that's what was being sold to people, the general trainee for literally decades and decades and decades.
yep,
And now with the internet, and there's good and bad. There's everything. So there's all of that, and there's a lot more good information also. But how do you
yeah.
shuffle through and figure
Agreed.
out what's what? Because it's all
Yeah,
out there.
yep,
So there's a lot more availability for good trainers, but there's also a lot more,
yep,
Joe Weider and his, pushing nonsense a lot of the time. But now there's a
yep,
thousand of those. There's 100,000 of those just pushing
yep.
whatever they want.
And
So
they're
yeah,
easily accessible. They're right at your fingertips too, like
yeah,
literally that information.
yeah,
The other thing related to this day and age, I joined a commercial gym that's near me, and I saw this anywhere before, not on the same scale, because it was like uh, the university fitness center. It was like all over the place, but people on their cell phones.
yeah,
It's like all over, and it's unfortunate because there's good stuff that smartphones bring to the mix, and there's bad stuff. And this is in terms of being in the gym. And I know some people they track their workouts on their phone,
yeah,
or maybe they listen to music, or maybe they're telling you how to lift weights or something like that. But a lot of it is just distraction,
yeah.
and you're losing your focus. You'd be better off just keeping in your, if you take it to the gym, just keep it in your locker. You can't focus. You can only focus on one thing, either your phone or your workout. You pick. But why are you going to the gym? You're going there to work out, right? You're not going there to be on your phone, but you see it all the time.
Yeah, sure.
And just giving people another reason just to waste time in the gym. And that 2 hour workout is really maybe like 30 minutes of actual work,
Yeah.
and the rest is
My
on your
wife and I
phone.
were talking about not just that, but how well, there's more people than ever in the gym. There's also that people don't work in anymore. Like that you talk to someone who's on 20S and they'll work in on a machine, which is just switching a pin or something,
Yeah,
and they don't even know what you're talking about. They're looking like crazy. They don't want to do that. But so a lot of the interactions probably
yeah,
not there. But maybe that's why things like CrossFit and other group classes has actually grown. Maybe some people are craving that interaction where maybe you used to get that just from regular going to the gym type thing. I don't know. But so I'm going to kind of try to start wrapping this down, Matt. But we went a lot through your history and it's a lot of very interesting stories. Is there anything that you want to say that we haven't really talked about, or any part big piece that we missed, or anything like that? I'm happy to still talk if you.
no, I think that was. I mean, I got a lot more stories. There are like all different rabbit holes and stuff like
I know you
that
was. I
unrelated
know.
to people. After 40 some years, you tend to have build up a lot of stories. But I think I got most of this stuff out, and hopefully that you're. Uh, Thanks for making a connection in the invite, and I hope your listeners learn some things, maybe from especially because you're as I get older, I enjoy history more and more, especially as it relates to strength training. So it's like kind of giddy when I stumbled across your vids on and your whole the Iron History kind of thing, because
Yeah,
I love that stuff.
and a lot of
And
things
hopefully your
that
listeners, there's some stuff that we talked about that maybe your listeners they're getting a different perspective of uh what was going on through over the years in terms of strength coaching and whatnot.
I think it's a combination of people that are interested in hearing and about. So we don't. Yours is a Iron history is more of a like, so the strength coaching is a huge part of it and how it grew, and how, but it's also almost side step or a sideline from bodybuilding and weightlifting, meaning they go together, but they're a little bit different there. And we don't hear that perspective as often. Obviously, there's overlap in the certain names. That's why some of the names I know, like Dr. Ken, was he would write for the Muscle magazine and stuff like that. But then there was a whole bunch of
Yeah,
cool
right.
people that I wasn't familiar with because they're in more the sports related and strength coaching and
Sure.
you too with your books you kind of overlap a lot of that as well. So I think it's while I know some of that stuff, I don't know it as well as the others. So it was really interesting for me to hear from someone who actually lived through that time and the growth of strength coaching and what that looked like and how it related to high intensity training. And so yeah, no, I thought it was super interesting hearing from your perspective. So I hopefully some of our my listeners or watchers or whatever will enjoy that too. So I appreciate it.
And feel free if some of your listeners want to follow up on anything, feel free to include my email address.
Sure, I'll put it
I mean, they
under.
could technically they could find me if they like an email address like on Rutgers website.
Yeah.
They could find my contact information there, like a Rutgers edu address and all.
Well,
But
I'll put it under on. Yeah, I have your email. I'll put it under on the YouTube description underneath there. But that was
yeah,
great.
I'm okay with that.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time, and
Thank you, Jared,
yeah, we'll talk some more. And
and we'll be talking.
yeah, all right. Appreciate it. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Take care.
You too. Bye.
Bye.